A millionaire on the brink of death asked a small beggar to pretend to be his son for a day. When his heart was about to stop, the little boy shared a secret that made the millionaire burst into tears. A millionaire on the brink of death asked a small beggar to pretend to be his son for a day. When his heart was about to stop, the little boy shared a secret that made the millionaire burst into tears. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence in the luxurious hospital suite. Victor Hawthorne, once a titan of industry, now lay motionless, his weathered face a stark contrast to the crisp white sheets that enveloped him. The room, despite its opulent furnishings, felt cold and impersonal, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. James Hawthorne, Victor's son, stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. At 42, he bore the weight of his father's empire on his shoulders, a burden that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. His eyes, red-rimmed from sleepless nights, darted between his father's still form and the team of doctors huddled in the corner of the room. Dr. Emily Chen, the lead physician, approached James with a grim expression. "Mr. Hawthorne," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm afraid we need to discuss your father's condition." James nodded, bracing himself for the words he had been dreading for weeks. "It's been 2 months and there's been no improvement," Dr. Chen continued. "We've exhausted all our options. I think it's time we consider discontinuing life support." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. James felt his world tilt. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it painfully real. He glanced at his father, searching for any sign of the formidable man who had built an empire from nothing. How long does he have if we... James couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Dr. Chen's eyes softened with sympathy. "It's hard to say. It could be hours, maybe days. But I must stress, Mr. Hawthorne, that continuing like this, it's not what most would consider a life worth living." James turned back to the window, his mind racing. How had it come to this? Just 2 months ago, Victor Hawthorne had been unstoppable, closing million-dollar deals and charming investors with his trademark charisma. Now he lay here, a shell of his former self, kept alive by machines and the stubborn hope of his family. As if summoned by his thoughts, the door opened and Sophia, James's wife, entered the room. Her face, usually a picture of poise and elegance, was etched with worry. She crossed the room quickly, wrapping her arms around James in a silent gesture of support. "What did the doctors say?" she whispered, though the look on James's face told her everything she needed to know. James swallowed hard, trying to find the words. They think it's time to let him go, Sophia. They want us to consider turning off the machines." Sophia's grip on her husband tightened. "Oh, James," she breathed, her voice catching. "What are we going to do?" Before James could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices and the sound of running feet broke the somber atmosphere. Dr. Chen rushed to the door, throwing it open to reveal a scene of chaos. Nurses and orderlies were scrambling, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. "It's impossible," one of them was saying, her voice trembling. "I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Chen grabbed the arm of a passing nurse. "What's going on?" she demanded. The nurse's eyes were wide with amazement. "It's Mr. Rodriguez in 305. He just woke up from a 6-month coma. He's asking for his family." A collective gasp rippled through the room. James felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. If Mr. Rodriguez could wake up after 6 months, then maybe... He turned to his father's bed, half expecting to see Victor sitting up, demanding his morning paper and a strong cup of coffee. But Victor remained still, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest the only sign of life. Dr. Chen was already on her phone, barking orders and requesting immediate tests for Mr. Rodriguez. The energy in the room had shifted, charged with a mixture of excitement and cautious optimism. Sophia squeezed James's hand. "Don't give up hope," she whispered. "Miracles can happen." James nodded, his eyes never leaving his father's face. He thought of all the times Victor had defied the odds, in business and in life. The man was a fighter, always had been. Maybe, just maybe, he had one more fight left in him. As the commotion in the hallway continued, James made a silent vow. He wouldn't give up on his father. Not yet. Victor Hawthorne had built an empire from nothing, faced countless challenges and emerged victorious. This was just another battle, and James would be damned if he'd let his father fight it alone. Little did James know that as he stood there, holding on to hope with every fiber of his being, the universe was setting in motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The awakening of Mr. Rodriguez was just the beginning, a prelude to a story of redemption, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family that would unfold in ways none of them could have imagined. As the day's last light faded from the sky, casting long shadows across the room, a faint twitch of Victor's finger went unnoticed. The first sign of a journey back from the brink, a flicker of life that would soon burst into a flame, igniting a series of events that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and the very fabric of the Hawthorne family. The following days were a blur of activity in the Hawthorne wing of St. Mary's Hospital. The miraculous awakening of Mr. Rodriguez had injected a new energy into the staff and patients alike. Hope, that most fragile and powerful of emotions, permeated the air like a tangible force. For James Hawthorne, each passing hour was a roller coaster of emotions. He found himself torn between cautious optimism and the harsh reality of his father's unchanged condition. The doctors had redoubled their efforts, running new tests and exploring experimental treatments, but Victor remained stubbornly unresponsive. It was on the third day after Mr. Rodriguez's awakening that everything changed. James had just stepped out of his father's room to grab a much-needed coffee when he heard a commotion behind him. He turned to see nurses rushing into Victor's room, their faces a mix of shock and excitement. Heart-pounding, James sprinted back, pushing past the gathering crowd of medical staff. What he saw when he entered the room would be forever etched in his memory. Victor Hawthorne, the man who had been lying motionless for 2 months, was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide open and alert. He was tugging at the tubes and wires attached to his body, his face a mask of confusion and determination. "Dad?" James gasped, hardly daring to believe his eyes. Victor's head snapped towards his son, recognition flooding his features. "James," he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "What in God's name is going on? Where am I?" "Doctor." Chen was already at Victor's side, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Hawthorne, please try to remain calm. You're in the hospital. You've been in a coma for the past 2 months." 2 months, Victor repeated, incredulity coloring his voice. He shook his head vigorously, as if trying to clear away cobwebs. "Nonsense. I have meetings to attend, deals to close. I can't have been out for 2 months. James approached the bed cautiously, still half convinced he was dreaming. "It's true, Dad. You had a stroke during a board meeting. We almost lost you." Victor's eyes softened as he took in his son's haggard appearance. He reached out a trembling hand which James grasped tightly. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to worry you." The room was a flurry of activity as nurses checked equipment and doctors conferred in hushed tones. Dr. Chen was beaming as she turned to James. "This is remarkable, Mr. Hawthorne. Your father's vital signs are stabilizing, and he seems to be fully cognizant. We'll need to run a battery of tests, of course, but this is, well, it's nothing short of miraculous." As the initial shock wore off, James felt a wave of relief wash over him. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I need to call Sophia. Let her know." "No time for that now," Victor interrupted, his voice growing stronger by the minute. "James, I need you to listen carefully. There's something I have to do, something important." James frowned, concern creeping back into his voice. "Dad, you just woke up from a 2-month coma. Whatever it is, it can wait. You need to rest. Let the doctors examine you." But Victor was already trying to swing his legs over the side of the bed, his face set in a determined scowl that James knew all too well. It was the same expression he wore when closing a particularly tough deal or facing down a boardroom full of skeptical investors. "Mr. Hawthorne, please," Dr. Chen interjected, gently but firmly pushing Victor back against the pillows. "You're in no condition to be moving around. Your body has been inactive for months. You need time to recover." Victor fixed the doctor with a steely gaze. "With all due respect, doctor, I've been resting for 2 months. There's something I need to do and it can't wait. Now either you help me out of this bed, or I'll do it myself." James recognized the tone in his father's voice. It was the same unyielding determination that had built Hawthorne Industries from the ground up. He knew from experience that once Victor set his mind to something, there was no stopping him. "Dad, please," James pleaded. "Whatever it is, I can take care of it for you. Just tell me what needs to be done." Victor shook his head, his eyes taking on a faraway look. "No, son. This is something I have to do myself. It's about Sarah." The name hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah, James's sister, Victor's daughter, the one whose name had been unspoken in the Hawthorne household for nearly 2 decades. James felt a chill run down his spine. What could be so urgent about Sarah that it would drive Victor to such extremes? Dr. Chen, sensing the tension in the room, tried once more to reason with her patient. "Mr. Hawthorne, I understand you feel this is urgent, but your health must come first. Give yourself at least a day to regain some strength. We need to run tests, make sure there are no lingering effects from your coma." For a moment, it seemed Victor might relent, but then his jaw set and James knew the battle was lost. 24 hours, Victor conceded, not a minute more. "And then I'm walking out of here, with or without your approval." James and Dr. Chen exchanged worried glances. They both knew that short of physically restraining him, there would be no stopping Victor Hawthorne once those 24 hours were up. As the medical team bustled around, preparing Victor for a battery of tests, James stepped out into the hallway. He leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to steady himself. The joy of his father's awakening was now tinged with a gnawing worry. What was so important about Sarah that it would drive Victor to such reckless behavior? And after all these years, why now? Little did James know that Victor's urgency was driven by something far beyond his understanding. In the liminal space between life and death, Victor had glimpsed something, remembered something that would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of the Hawthorne family. As James stood there, torn between relief and apprehension, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. His father's awakening, miraculous as it was, felt like the first rumble of an approaching storm. Whatever lay ahead, James knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Inside the room, Victor lay back against the pillows, his mind racing. The doctors might think him rash, even foolish, but they didn't understand. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to right the wrongs of the past. And Victor Hawthorne was not a man to waste such opportunities. As the machines beeped and the doctors murmured, Victor closed his eyes, his thoughts drifting to a small confectionery shop across town and the bittersweet memories it held. Whatever it took, he would make things right. He owed it to Sarah, to himself, and to the grandchild he had never known. The clock was ticking and Victor Hawthorne had a mission. The world had better be ready, because nothing was going to stand in his way. The 24 hours that Dr. Chen had negotiated with Victor Hawthorne passed in a whirlwind of tests, examinations, and hushed conversations. The hospital staff moved with barely contained excitement, acutely aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Victor, for his part, endured the prodding and poking with uncharacteristic patience, his mind focused on the task that lay ahead. As the deadline approached, James paced the hospital corridor, his phone pressed to his ear. "I understand your concerns, Doctor." "Chen, but you don't know my father. If he says he's leaving, he's leaving. Short of strapping him to the bed, there's nothing we can do to stop him." Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the speaker, her frustration evident. "Mr. Hawthorne, I cannot in good conscience discharge your father. His recovery, while remarkable, is still in its early stages. The risks of complications are significant." James ran a hand through his disheveled hair, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "I know, Doctor. Believe me, I've tried to reason with him. But when Victor Hawthorne sets his mind to something, then we'll have to make the best of a bad situation," Dr. Chen sighed. "I'm sending a nurse to his room with discharge papers and post-care instructions. Please, Mr. Hawthorne, do everything in your power to ensure he follows them." As James ended the call, he turned to find his father standing in the doorway of his hospital room, fully dressed in a crisp suit that Sophia had brought from home. Despite the pallor of his skin and the slight tremor in his hands, Victor exuded an aura of determination that seemed to fill the entire corridor. "Ready to go, son?" Victor asked, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. James felt a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Dad, are you sure about this? The doctors think it's too soon. Whatever this is about, surely it can wait a few more days." Victor's eyes softened as he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "James, I know you're worried, but trust me when I say this can't wait. There are things I need to make right, mistakes I need to correct before it's too late." The mention of mistakes brought Sarah to the forefront of James's mind once again. He had been young when his sister left, but the pain of her absence had never fully healed. "Dad, what's really going on? What does this have to do with Sarah?" For a moment, Victor's composure slipped, and James caught a glimpse of the turmoil behind his father's eyes. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the steely resolve that had made Victor Hawthorne a force to be reckoned with in the business world. "All will be explained in due time, son. For now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" James wanted to argue, to demand answers, but something in his father's tone stopped him. Instead, he nodded, resigned to the fact that Victor would reveal his motivations when he was ready, and not a moment sooner. As they made their way out of the hospital, James couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed them. News of Victor's miraculous recovery had spread quickly, and staff members peered around corners and through doorways to catch a glimpse of the man who had defied medical odds. Outside, the bright sunlight seemed to invigorate Victor further. He took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. "It feels good to be back in the land of the living," he quipped, a shadow of his old humor returning. James managed a small smile as he helped his father into the waiting car. "Where to, Dad? Home?" Victor shook his head. "No, not yet. There's somewhere I need to go first." He leaned forward, giving the driver an address that James didn't recognize. As the car pulled away from the curb, James settled back into his seat, studying his father's profile. There was something different about Victor. Beyond the physical changes wrought by his time in the hospital, a new purpose seemed to radiate from him, mixed with an urgency that James couldn't quite understand. The city passed by in a blur of motion and color, a stark contrast to the stillness of the hospital room that had been their world for the past 2 months. James found himself struggling to reconcile the father he saw now with the larger-than-life figure who had dominated boardrooms and headlines for decades. "You know, James," Victor said suddenly, breaking the silence, "life has a funny way of giving you perspective. When you're lying there, trapped in your own mind, you start to see things differently. The deals, the money, the power. It all seems so insignificant compared to the things that really matter." James raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this philosophical turn. "And what really matters, Dad?" Victor turned to face his son, his eyes shining with an emotion James couldn't quite place. "Family, James. The love we share, the bonds we forge, and the ones we break." He paused, his gaze drifting back to the window. "I've made many mistakes in my life, son, but none greater than what happened with Sarah. It's time I tried to make amends." Before James could respond, the car slowed to a stop. Victor was out the door almost before the vehicle had come to a complete halt, his newfound energy propelling him forward. James scrambled to follow, his mind reeling from his father's words. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, he found himself in front of a small, unassuming storefront. The faded sign above the door read, "Sweet Memories Confectionery." Victor stood before the shop, his hand resting on the door handle, a storm of emotions playing across his face. James approached cautiously, sensing the significance of the moment. "Dad?" he ventured. "What is this place?" Victor took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle. "This, James, is where it all began, and where, God willing, we'll find a way to make it right." With that cryptic statement, Victor pushed open the door, the cheerful tinkle of the bell a stark counterpoint to the tension that hung in the air. As James followed his father into the shop, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping not just into a confectionery, but into the past itself, with all its painful memories and long-buried secrets. The sweet aroma of chocolate and caramel enveloped them, and for a moment, James was transported back to his childhood, to happier times when his family was whole. But as he watched his father's face, etched with lines of regret and determination, he knew that the journey they were embarking on would be anything but sweet. Little did they know that fate, in its infinite wisdom, had set the stage for an encounter that would change their lives forever. As Victor Hawthorne stood in the middle of the quaint confectionery, the wheels of destiny were already in motion, bringing together past and present in ways they could never have imagined. The interior of Sweet Memories confectionery was like stepping into a bygone era. Glass jars filled with colorful candies lined the walls, their contents sparkling in the soft light. The air was thick with the scent of chocolate and sugar, a saccharine embrace that seemed to wrap around them as they entered. Victor stood motionless just inside the doorway, his eyes closed as if savoring a long-forgotten memory. James watched his father, a mix of curiosity and concern etched on his face. He had never seen Victor like this, vulnerable, almost fragile in his stillness. "Welcome to Sweet Memories," a cheerful voice called out, breaking the spell. An elderly woman emerged from behind the counter, her silver hair neatly pinned back and a warm smile lighting up her face. As her eyes fell on Victor, however, the smile faltered, replaced by a look of shock and recognition. "Victor? Victor Hawthorne? Is that really you?" she gasped, one hand flying to her chest. Victor opened his eyes, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hello, Martha. It's been a long time." Martha moved around the counter, her eyes never leaving Victor's face. "My word, I never thought I'd see you here again. Not after everything that happened." James looked between his father and Martha, feeling like he was watching a play where he didn't know the script. "Dad?" he prompted gently. Victor seemed to remember himself, turning to his son with a start. "James, this is Martha Callahan. She and her late husband Tom owned this shop when your sister used to work here." The pieces started to fall into place in James's mind. He had been young when Sarah left, but he remembered snippets, heated arguments, tears and doors slamming, and through it all, the constant refrain of a name: Sweet Memories. Martha's eyes widened as she took in James. "My goodness, is this little Jamie? How you've grown." She turned back to Victor, her expression growing serious. "Victor, what brings you here after all these years? Is it about Sarah?" At the mention of Sarah's name, Victor's composure cracked. He reached out, steadying himself against a display of chocolate truffles. "Martha, I need to make things right. I've been such a fool, and now I'm afraid it might be too late." Martha's face softened with compassion. She gently took Victor's arm, leading him to a small table in the corner of the shop. "Come, sit down. You look like you could use a cup of tea and maybe one of Tom's special chocolate croissants. They always were Sarah's favorite." As Martha bustled behind the counter, James helped his father into a chair. He couldn't remember ever seeing Victor accept help so readily, and it unnerved him. "Dad, what's going on? Why are we really here?" Victor sighed heavily, his eyes fixed on the worn tabletop. "James, there's so much you don't know. So much I should have told you years ago." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Your sister? She was pregnant when she left." The words hit James like a physical blow. "Pregnant? But how? Why didn't I know about this?" "Because I was a stubborn, prideful old fool," Victor said, his voice thick with regret. "When Sarah told me, I didn't react well. I said terrible things I've regretted every day since. She ran away that night, and we never saw her again." Martha returned with a tray of tea and pastries, setting it down gently. "It was a difficult time for everyone," she said softly. "Sarah was so young, so scared. She worked here at the shop right up until the day she left town." James's mind was reeling. "So I have a niece or nephew out there somewhere. Have you been in contact with Sarah all this time?" Victor shook his head, his hands wrapped around the warm teacup as if drawing strength from it. "No, son. I tried to find her, but she didn't want to be found. And after a while, I convinced myself it was better this way, that she was better off without me in her life." Martha placed a comforting hand on Victor's shoulder. "You can't change the past, Victor, but maybe it's not too late to build a future." Victor looked up at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's why I'm here, Martha. When I was in the coma, I had a dream, or maybe it was more than a dream. I saw Sarah and a child. They were here in the shop. It felt so real, so vivid. When I woke up, I knew I had to come here to try and make things right." James leaned forward, his heart racing. Dad, are you saying you think Sarah might come back here after all this time? Victor shook his head slowly. I don't know, son. It doesn't make sense, I know, but something is telling me this is where I need to be. That somehow this is the key to finding her, to making amends. As they sat there, the sweet scent of chocolate hanging in the air, James felt as though he was seeing his father for the first time. The titan of industry, the unstoppable force that was Victor Hawthorne, had been replaced by a man weighted down by regret and desperate for redemption. Martha refilled their teacups, her movements deliberate and careful. Victor, I don't know if Sarah will ever come back here, but I do know this. She loved this place. It was her safe haven, even when things were at their worst. If there's any place in this world that holds the essence of who Sarah was, it's right here in this little shop. Victor nodded, his eyes roaming the shelves lined with jars of brightly colored candies. I remember how her eyes would light up when she talked about working here. She always said it was like being surrounded by pure joy. As they sat in contemplative silence, the bell above the door chimed. James turned, half expecting, hoping even, to see Sarah walk in. Instead, a small boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, slipped into the shop. His clothes were worn and a size too small, his sneakers held together with duct tape. Despite his shabby appearance, his eyes were bright and alert, darting around the shop with undisguised longing. Martha stood, her face creasing with concern. "Can I help you, young man?" The boy startled, as if he hadn't expected to be noticed. I was just looking," he mumbled, already backing towards the door. Victor, who had been lost in thought, turned at the sound of the child's voice. As his eyes fell on the boy, something indefinable passed across his face. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or a spark of intuition. Before anyone could react, Victor reached for one of the beautifully wrapped chocolates on the table. "Here, son," he said, holding it out to the boy. "Everyone should have a taste of sweetness in their life." The boy hesitated, his gaze flicking between Victor's face and the outstretched chocolate. Then, quick as a flash, he darted forward, snatched the treat from Victor's hand, and was out the door before anyone could blink. "Well, I never," Martha exclaimed, her hand on her heart. "That little scamp." But Victor was already on his feet, moving with a speed that belied his recent incapacitation. "Wait," he called out, stumbling towards the door. James jumped up to steady his father. "Dad, what is it? It's just a chocolate." Victor turned to his son, his eyes blazing with an intensity that James hadn't seen in years. "No, James. It's more than that, that boy. I can't explain it, but I feel like he's the reason we're here. We have to find him." As Victor pushed open the door, the cheerful tinkle of the bell a stark contrast to the tension of the moment, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something momentous. The simple act of a stolen chocolate seemed to have set in motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever. Little did they know that, as they stepped out onto the sun-drenched street in pursuit of a mysterious boy, fate was weaving its intricate web, bringing together past and present, lost and found, in ways they could never have imagined. The hunt for the boy with the stolen chocolate was about to lead the Hawthorns down a path of discovery, reconciliation, and the true meaning of family. And somewhere in the tapestry of the city, a long-lost piece of their family puzzle was waiting to be found. The bustling streets of the city were a stark contrast to the quiet nostalgia of Sweet Memories confectionery. Victor Hawthorne, still weak from his long hospitalization, stumbled onto the sidewalk, his eyes frantically scanning the crowd for any sign of the young boy who had vanished with the chocolate. James was right behind him, torn between concern for his father's health and bewilderment at the sudden turn of events. "Dad, wait," he called out, grasping Victor's arm to steady him. "You're in no condition to be running around. Let's think about this rationally." But Victor's eyes were alight with a fervor James had never seen before. "You don't understand, son. That boy, there's something about him. I can't explain it, but I feel it in my bones. We have to find him." Martha appeared in the doorway of the shop, her face etched with worry. "Victor, please. You've only just recovered. Come back inside. We can call the authorities if you're really concerned." Victor shook his head vehemently. "No, no authorities. This is something I have to do myself." He turned to James, his voice softening. "Son, I know this doesn't make sense, but I'm asking you to trust me. Will you help me find him?" James looked into his father's eyes, seeing not the titan of industry he had grown up with, but a man driven by an inexplicable urgency. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "All right, Dad, but we do this my way. No more running." With a grateful squeeze of James's shoulder, Victor agreed. They bid a hasty farewell to a bewildered Martha and set off down the street, their eyes peeled for any sign of the mysterious boy. The city thrummed with life around them. Street vendors hawked their wares, business people hurried to and fro, and tourists ambled along, cameras at the ready. But of the young chocolate thief there was no sign. As they searched, Victor filled James in on more details about Sarah's departure. "She was so young, James, only 17. When she told me she was pregnant, I lost control. Said things no father should ever say to his child. By the time I came to my senses, she was gone." James absorbed this information, his mind reeling. "But why didn't you ever tell me? I always thought Sarah had just run away, rebelling against your strict rules or something." Victor's face crumpled with shame. "I was too proud, too stubborn to admit my mistake. I thought I could find her, bring her home, and it would all blow over. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, And then one day I realized she wasn't coming back." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion up ahead. A fruit vendor was yelling and gesticulating wildly, pointing down an alleyway. "Stop, thief! Someone catch that kid!" James and Victor exchanged a look before hurrying towards the scene. As they approached, they caught a glimpse of a small figure darting into the alley, clutching something to his chest. "That's him!" Victor exclaimed, a surge of energy propelling him forward. James cursed under his breath, torn between following his father and trying to calm the irate vendor. Opting to stay with Victor, James plunged into the alley after him. The narrow passage was dim and cluttered, lined with overflowing dumpsters and stacks of discarded pallets. Ahead, they could hear the rapid patter of small feet and the occasional clatter of a displaced can or bottle. Victor pressed on, his breath coming in ragged gasps. James, alarmed by his father's pallor, tried to slow him down. "Dad, please, you're pushing yourself too hard. We can find another way." But Victor was beyond reason. His eyes were fixed ahead, his jaw set with determination. As they emerged from the other end of the alley, they found themselves in a small, run-down park. And there, huddled on a bench, was the boy. He looked up as they approached, his eyes wide with fear. In one hand he clutched the now slightly melted chocolate. In the other, a bruised apple, clearly the object of the fruit vendor's ire. Victor slowed his pace, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "It's all right, son. We're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk." The boy eyed them warily, his body tense to flee at any moment. James, catching his breath, took in the child's appearance. His clothes were threadbare and dirty, his face smudged with grime. But beneath it all, there was something hauntingly familiar about his features. "What's your name?" Victor asked gently, easing himself onto the opposite end of the bench. The boy remained silent, his eyes darting between Victor and James. "My name is Victor," the older man continued, his voice soft and reassuring. "And this is my son, James. We saw you in the candy shop earlier. I gave you that chocolate, remember?" At the mention of the chocolate, the boy's grip on the treat tightened. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "You're not in trouble," James added, crouching down to be at eye level with the child. "We just want to make sure you're okay. Are you hungry?" "Is that why you took the apple?" The boy's stomach chose that moment to let out an audible growl. A flush of embarrassment colored his cheeks, and he ducked his head. Victor's face softened with compassion. "When was the last time you had a proper meal, son?" For a long moment the boy remained silent. Then in a voice barely above a whisper he spoke. "Yesterday morning. At the shelter." James and Victor exchanged a pained look. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just a child stealing sweets for fun. This was a homeless boy, struggling to survive on the unforgiving streets of the city. "What's your name?" Victor asked again, his voice thick with emotion. The boy hesitated, then mumbled, "Alex. My name is Alex." As the name left the boy's lips, Victor felt a jolt of recognition. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but something deep within him resonated with that name. He leaned forward, his eyes searching the child's face. "Alex," he repeated softly. "It's nice to meet you, Alex. Listen, I know you don't know us, but we'd like to help you. Would you let us buy you a proper meal?" Alex's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and suspicion. He looked from Victor to James and back again, as if trying to gauge their sincerity. James, sensing the boy's hesitation, added, "No strings attached, Alex, just a meal. And maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself. How does that sound?" For what felt like an eternity, Alex sat motionless, weighing his options. Then slowly he nodded. As they stood to leave the park, Victor felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The exertion of the chase, combined with his weakened condition, suddenly caught up with him. He swayed on his feet, reaching out to steady himself against the bench. "Dad!" James exclaimed, rushing to support his father. Alex watched with wide eyes as James helped Victor sit back down. The boy's gaze darted between the two men, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "I'm all right," Victor insisted, though his pale complexion belied his words. "Just need a moment to catch my breath." As James fussed over his father, neither of them noticed Alex slipping the slightly melted chocolate into Victor's coat pocket. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes about the boy's character. Little did they know that this simple act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel long-held secrets and reshape the very fabric of their lives. As they sat in that run-down park, an unlikely trio brought together by chance and chocolate, the threads of fate were weaving a tapestry of redemption, reconciliation, and the true meaning of family. The journey that lay ahead would test them all, pushing the boundaries of trust, forgiveness, and love. But for now, in the fading light of the afternoon, they were simply three souls finding a moment of connection in a world that had shown them little kindness. As Victor regained his strength and they prepared to leave the park, none of them could have imagined the profound impact this chance encounter would have on their lives. The story of the Hawthorns and the boy named Alex was only just beginning, and the city around them held its breath in anticipation of the revelations to come. The neon sign of Rosie's Diner flickered to life as dusk settled over the city. Inside, the retro-style booths were filled with the usual evening crowd, tired office workers, couples on casual dates, and a smattering of regulars nursing cups of coffee. But tonight, tucked away in a corner booth, sat an unlikely trio. Victor Hawthorne, multi-millionaire business tycoon, James, his impeccably dressed son, and Alex, a street-worn child with wary eyes and a growling stomach. As they settled into the red vinyl seats, Alex's eyes darted around the diner, taking in the chrome fixtures and the tempting aromas wafting from the kitchen. His fingers drummed nervously on the laminated menu, a stark contrast to the composed demeanors of Victor and James. A waitress approached, her eyebrows raising slightly at the incongruous group. "Welcome to Rosie's. What can I get for you folks?" James smiled warmly. "We'll need a few minutes, thanks. But could we start with 3 chocolate milkshakes?" As the waitress nodded and moved away, Victor leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Alex. "Order whatever you like, son. Don't hold back." Alex's gaze flicked between Victor and James, as if waiting for the catch. When none came, he buried his nose in the menu, his eyes widening at the array of choices. James watched the boy with a mixture of curiosity and concern. There was something about Alex that tugged at him, a familiarity he couldn't quite place. He glanced at his father, noting the intensity with which Victor observed the child. What was going on in that brilliant, often inscrutable mind of his? The waitress returned with their milkshakes, and Alex wasted no time in taking a long, appreciative sip. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, the first genuine expression of joy they had seen from him. "Ready to order?" the waitress asked, pen poised over her notepad. Alex hesitated, then mumbled, "Can I have the double cheeseburger with extra fries? And onion rings?" "Of course, sweetheart," the waitress replied, her expression softening as she took in Alex's ragged appearance. "Anything else?" Victor nodded encouragingly. "How about we add a side salad to that? Growing boys need their vegetables." Alex's nose wrinkled slightly at the mention of vegetables, but he nodded, not wanting to seem ungrateful. As James and Victor placed their own, more modest orders, Alex's eyes roamed the diner. He seemed to be memorizing every detail, from the jukebox in the corner to the pie display by the counter. Once the waitress had left, Victor turned his attention back to Alex. "So, Alex," he began gently, "can you tell us a bit about yourself? How long have you been on your own? Alex's guard immediately went up, his body tensing. Why do you want to know? He asked, suspicion coloring his voice. James intervened, his tone soothing. We're just trying to understand, Alex. We want to help if we can. The boy's eyes narrowed. I don't need help. I can take care of myself. Victor nodded, a sad smile playing at his lips. I'm sure you can. You seem like a very capable young man. But everyone needs a little help sometimes, even me. This caught Alex's attention. You? But you're... He gestured vaguely at Victor's expensive suit. Rich? Victor finished for him. Yes, I am. But money can't solve every problem. It can't bring back lost time or undo mistakes. His voice grew softer, tinged with regret. It can't bring back family. Something in Victor's tone seemed to resonate with Alex. He studied the older man's face, as if searching for something. Then, slowly, he began to speak. I've been on my own for about a year, he said quietly. After she was gone, they tried to put me in foster care. But I ran away. I didn't want to be with strangers. James felt his heart constrict. A year on the streets, alone. It was unimaginable. What about your father? He asked gently. Alex's face hardened. Never knew him. Mum said he was a big shot who didn't want anything to do with us. Said it was better that way. Victor's sharp intake of breath was audible. His hands, wrapped around his milkshake glass, trembled slightly. James shot his father a concerned look, but Victor's eyes were fixed on Alex, a storm of emotions playing across his face. Before they could probe further, the waitress arrived with their food. Alex's eyes widened at the sight of his loaded plate, and he dug in with gusto, seemingly grateful for the interruption. As they ate, James tried to keep the conversation light, asking Alex about his favorite subjects in school and what he liked to do for fun. The boy's responses were guarded at first, but as the meal progressed, he began to open up bit by bit. Victor, however, remained uncharacteristically quiet. He picked at his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. James couldn't shake the feeling that his father knew more than he was letting on. As Alex polished off the last of his fries, Victor finally spoke up. Alex, he said, his voice gentle but firm, I'd like to make you an offer. I have a big house with plenty of spare rooms. Would you consider staying with us for a while? Just until we can figure out a more permanent solution for you? Alex's fork clattered to his plate. He looked at Victor with a mixture of longing and distrust. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Victor leaned forward, his eyes intense. Because, Alex, I believe that our meeting today wasn't just chance. I believe you were brought into our lives for a reason, and I'd like the opportunity to find out what that reason is. James watched this exchange with growing amazement. He had never seen his father like this, so open, so vulnerable. What had brought about this change? Alex sat in silence for a long moment, his young face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he spoke. If I say yes, can I leave whenever I want? You won't try to stop me? Victor nodded solemnly. You have my word. You're not our prisoner, Alex. We just want to help. After what seemed like an eternity, Alex gave a small nod. Okay, he said softly. I'll come. For now. As they prepared to leave the diner, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. His father's inexplicable connection to this boy, Alex's mysterious background, it all pointed to a larger story, one that was only just beginning to unfold. Little did they know that as they stepped out into the night, the wheels of fate were turning. The simple act of offering shelter to a homeless boy was about to set in motion a chain of events that would unravel long-held secrets, challenge their perceptions of family, and ultimately lead them on a journey of healing and redemption. As their car pulled away from Rosie's diner, the city lights twinkling around them, none of them could have predicted the profound impact this chance encounter would have on their lives. The story of the Hawthorns and the boy named Alex was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test the bonds of family, the power of forgiveness, and the enduring strength of love. The night air hummed with possibility as they drove towards the Hawthorn mansion. In the back seat, Alex's eyes were wide, taking in the gradually changing scenery. From the rundown neighborhoods he knew to the manicured lawns of the elite, It was like crossing into another world. Victor watched the boy through the rearview mirror, his heart heavy with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He couldn't explain the pull he felt towards Alex, the sense of familiarity that tugged at his soul, but he knew with a certainty that defied logic that this boy was the key to unlocking the past and perhaps to healing the wounds that had festered for far too long. The Hawthorne mansion loomed before them, a sprawling testament to wealth and success that seemed to touch the night sky. As the car pulled up the circular driveway, Alex pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. James glanced back at the boy, a small smile playing on his lips. "Welcome to our home, Alex," he said softly, trying to put the child at ease. Victor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the drive, seemed to shake himself out of deep thought. He turned in his seat to face Alex. "I know it might seem overwhelming, but I want you to feel comfortable here. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." Alex nodded silently, his eyes never leaving the imposing structure before him. As they stepped out of the car, the front door of the mansion swung open, spilling warm light onto the driveway. Sophia Hawthorne stood in the doorway, her elegant figure silhouetted against the light. Her face was a mask of confusion as she took in the scene before her. Her husband, whom she had expected to still be in the hospital, her son, and a disheveled young boy she had never seen before. "Victor, James, what's going on?" she called out, descending the steps to meet them. Victor put a gentle hand on Alex's shoulder, guiding him forward. "Sophia, my dear, we have a guest. This is Alex. He'll be staying with us for a while." Sophia's eyes widened as she took in Alex's appearance, the worn clothes, the smudged face, the wary eyes. To her credit, she recovered quickly, her surprised expression melting into a warm smile. "Alex, it's lovely to meet you," she said, her voice kind. "You must be hungry after your journey. Why don't we go inside and I'll fix you something to eat?" Alex, who had been shrinking back slightly at Sophia's approach, looked up in surprise. "But we just ate at the diner," he said, confusion evident in his voice. James chuckled softly. "Trust me, Alex, in this house, there's always room for more food. Mom's cooking is legendary." As they made their way into the house, Alex's eyes darted everywhere, taking in the high ceilings, the plush carpets, the gleaming surfaces. It was clear that he had never seen anything like it before. Sophia led them to the kitchen, a warm, inviting space that seemed at odds with the grandeur of the rest of the house. As she busied herself at the stove, Victor pulled her aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. James watched as his mother's expression shifted from confusion to shock, to a sort of sad understanding. Meanwhile, Alex stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking lost and out of place. James approached him, speaking gently. "Would you like to sit down, Alex? It's been a long day." The boy nodded, allowing James to guide him to a stool at the kitchen island. As he sat, his hand brushed against his pocket, and a look of alarm crossed his face. "The chocolate!" he exclaimed, jumping up. "I forgot to give it back to Mr. Hawthorne." Victor turned at the sound of Alex's voice. "The chocolate. Oh, don't worry about that, son. It was a gift." But Alex was already fishing in his pocket, pulling out the now misshapen chocolate. I put it in your pocket when you got dizzy in the park," he admitted, his cheeks flushing. "I thought you might need it more than me." The kitchen fell silent as the implications of Alex's words sank in. This boy, who had so little, had given up the one treat he had received in who knows how long, out of concern for a stranger. Victor approached Alex slowly, kneeling down to meet the boy's eyes. "That was a very kind thing to do, Alex," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Alex shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "It's no big deal," he mumbled. Sophia, who had been watching this exchange with tears in her eyes, cleared her throat. "Well, I think this calls for a celebration," she announced. "How about some hot chocolate and cookies?" As Sophia busied herself with the treats, James couldn't help but notice the way his father watched Alex. There was a tenderness in Victor's eyes that James had rarely seen, a vulnerability that was at odds with the hard-driving businessman he knew. The evening passed in a blur of warm drinks, sweet treats, and cautious conversation. Alex slowly began to relax, his guard lowering inch by inch as the Hawthornes made every effort to make him feel welcome. As the night wore on, yawns began to punctuate the conversation. Victor stood, stretching slightly. I think it's time we all got some rest. Alex, let me show you to your room." The boy's eyes widened. "My room?" James nodded, smiling. "Of course. We have plenty of guest rooms. You'll have your own space here." As Victor led Alex upstairs, Sophia turned to James, her eyes full of questions. "James, what's really going on here? Your father shows up with a street child insisting we take him in. It's not like him at all." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Mum. Dad's been different since he woke up from the coma. He's fixated on this idea that he needs to make amends for something. And then we met Alex and I don't know. It's like Dad sees something in him that the rest of us can't." Sophia's brow furrowed in concern. "Do you think, could this have something to do with Sarah?" The name hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken grief and regret. James nodded slowly. "I think it might. Dad mentioned her today for the first time in years. He told me she was pregnant when she left." Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Pregnant? Oh, James, I had no idea. Your father never said—" Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Victor appeared, looking tired but oddly at peace. "Alex is settled in," he announced. Poor boy looked like he could hardly believe his eyes when he saw the bed. "I don't think he's had a proper night's sleep in a long time." Sophia approached her husband, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "Victor, darling, are you sure about this? Taking in a strange child? There are proper channels for this sort of thing." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "No channels, no authorities. Alex stays with us, at least for now. There's something about him, Sophia. I can't explain it, but I feel it in my bones. He's meant to be here." As Victor headed upstairs to bed, leaving Sophia and James exchanging worried glances, none of them could have predicted the chain of events that had been set in motion. In a room upstairs, a young boy lay awake, staring at a ceiling he never thought he'd see, in a home he never dreamed he'd have. And somewhere in the city, the wheels of fate continued to turn, bringing together past and present, lost and found, in ways that would soon shake the very foundations of the Hawthorne family. Little did they know that the simple act of opening their home to a stranger was about to unravel a web of secrets, challenge their understanding of family, and set them on a path to healing wounds that had festered for far too long. As the Hawthorne mansion settled into the quiet of night, the stage was set for revelations that would change their lives forever. The early morning sun streamed through the ornate windows of the Hawthorne mansion, casting long shadows across the polished floors. In the guest room, Alex stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The plush bed, softer than anything he had ever slept on, seemed to envelop him. For a brief moment, panic flared in his chest. Where was he? Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. The chocolate, the chase, the diner, and finally this grand house with its kind, if somewhat perplexing, inhabitants. Alex sat up slowly, his eyes roaming the room that was now, at least temporarily, his. A soft knock on the door startled him. "Alex, are you awake?" It was Sophia's voice, gentle and hesitant. "Yes," Alex called back, his voice still rough with sleep. Sophia peeked in, a warm smile on her face. "Good morning, dear. I've brought you some clean clothes. Why don't you get dressed and come down for breakfast when you're ready?" Alex nodded, still somewhat dazed by the kindness being shown to him. As Sophia closed the door, he approached the neatly folded pile of clothes she had left. They were simple, jeans, a t-shirt, a soft sweater, but they were clean and new. Alex ran his fingers over the fabric, marveling at the feel. It had been so long since he'd had new clothes. Downstairs, the Hawthorne family was gathered in the kitchen. Victor sat at the island, nursing a cup of coffee and looking lost in thought. James was busy at the stove, the sizzle and pop of bacon filling the air. Sophia flitted about, setting the table and casting worried glances at her husband. "Dad," James said, breaking the silence, "we need to talk about Alex. What's the plan here?" Victor looked up, his eyes focusing on his son. "The plan," he said slowly, "is to give that boy a home for as long as he needs it. To show him that there are people in this world who care." Sophia exchanged a glance with James before speaking. "Victor, darling, your heart is in the right place. But we can't just keep a child who isn't ours. There are laws, procedures." Victor's expression hardened. Laws and procedures that failed him, Sophia. That left him alone on the streets. No, Alex stays here where we can protect him, care for him. But why, Dad? James pressed, turning from the stove to face his father. Why this boy? What aren't you telling us? Victor opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Alex appeared in the doorway, looking small and uncertain in his new clothes. Good morning, Alex, Victor said warmly, his entire demeanor softening. Did you sleep well? Alex nodded, his eyes darting around the kitchen. Yes, sir. Thank you. None of that sir business, Victor chuckled. Victor is just fine. Come, sit down. James has made enough breakfast to feed an army. As Alex settled at the table, the family fell into a somewhat awkward silence. Sophia busied herself serving the food, while James and Victor exchanged meaningful glances over their coffee cups. So, Alex, James began, trying to break the tension, do you like sports? We have a great backyard for playing catch or soccer. Alex's eyes lit up slightly. I used to play soccer at school, he said softly. Before everything changed. Victor leaned forward, his expression intent. Alex, if you don't mind me asking, what happened to your mother? You mentioned she was gone. The kitchen fell silent, all eyes on Alex. The boy stared down at his plate, pushing his eggs around with his fork. She got sick, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Really sick. We didn't have money for doctors or medicine. One day she just didn't wake up. Sophia let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. James closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. But it was Victor's reaction that was the most striking. He reached out, grasping Alex's hand in his own. I'm so sorry, son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. No child should have to go through that. Alex looked up, meeting Victor's gaze. For a moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. The moment was broken by the shrill ring of the telephone. James moved to answer it, his brow furrowing as he listened to the voice on the other end. Dad, he said, covering the mouthpiece. It's the office. They're saying it's urgent. Victor waved his hand dismissively. Tell them I'm not available. Family comes first. James's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Never, in all his years, had he heard his father prioritize anything over work. He relayed the message and hung up, studying his father with newfound curiosity. As breakfast continued, the conversation gradually became more relaxed. Alex, bit by bit, began to open up. He spoke of his life before the streets, of a small apartment he shared with his mother, of her warm smile and gentle hands, of the bedtime stories she would tell him about a father he had never known. She always said he was a good man, Alex said, his voice taking on a wistful tone. That he didn't know about me, but if he did, he would have loved me. Victor's coffee cup clattered against its saucer, his hands suddenly unsteady. Sophia shot him a concerned look, but he waved it off. Alex, Victor said, his voice carefully controlled. Do you know your father's name or anything about him? Alex shook his head. Mum never told me. She said it was complicated. But she did give me this. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small tarnished locket. She said it belonged to him, that he gave it to her a long time ago. Victor's face drained of color as his eyes fixed on the locket. With trembling hands, he reached out. May I? He asked softly. Alex hesitated for a moment before placing the locket in Victor's palm. The older man turned it over, his fingers tracing the intricate design on its surface. With a soft click, the locket opened, revealing 2 small photographs inside. The kitchen fell silent as Victor stared at the contents of the locket. Then, without warning, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need some air, he muttered, before striding out of the kitchen and disappearing down the hall. James, Sophia, and Alex sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. It was Sophia who finally broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. James, why don't you take Alex out to see the garden? I think your father and I need to have a talk. As James led a confused Alex outside, Sophia steeled herself for the conversation ahead. She had a sinking feeling that the past they had tried so hard to bury was about to resurface, bringing with it revelations that would shake their family to its very core. Little did they know that the locket Alex had carried for so long was about to unlock a door to the past, one that would lead them down a path of discovery, reconciliation, and the true meaning of family. As Sophia set off to find Victor, the wheels of fate continued to turn, bringing them one step closer to a truth that would change their lives forever. The stage was set for a confrontation years in the making, one that would test the bonds of love, the power of forgiveness, and the enduring strength of family. And at the center of it all was Alex, a boy who had unknowingly carried the key to their shared history in his pocket all along. Sophia found Victor in his study, a room that had always been his sanctuary. He stood by the large bay window, his back to the door, shoulders hunched in a posture so uncharacteristic of the confident man she had known for decades. In his hand, he clutched the small locket, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. "Victor," Sophia said softly, closing the door behind her. "It's time we talked about this." He turned slowly, and the look on his face nearly broke her heart. Gone was the powerful businessman, the family patriarch. In his place stood a man haunted by ghosts of the past, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain, regret, and something else. Hope, perhaps. "It's Sarah's, Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The locket. I gave it to her on her 16th birthday." Sophia moved closer, her heart pounding. "And the photos inside?" Victor opened the locket with trembling fingers. "One is of Sarah, taken just a few months before she left. And the other—" He trailed off, unable to continue. Sophia peered at the tiny photographs. The first was indeed of Sarah, her young face beaming at the camera, full of life and promise. The second photo made her gasp. It was of a baby, no more than a few months old, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed oddly familiar. "Victor," she breathed, realization dawning. Is Alex?" "My grandson," Victor finished, his voice cracking. "Sarah's son. Our grandson, Sophia." The weight of this revelation hung heavy in the air between them. Sophia sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling. "But how can you be sure? It's been so long, and Alex, he doesn't know anything about his father." Victor moved to his desk, pulling open a drawer and retrieving a framed photograph. It was of him as a young man, standing proudly in front of the first Hawthorne Industries building. "Look at this, Sophia. Look at me, and then think of Alex. The resemblance. It's undeniable." As Sophia studied the photo, the similarities became clear. The shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, even the way Alex's brow furrowed when he was confused. It was all there, a mirror image of a young Victor Hawthorne. "Oh, Victor," Sophia said, tears welling in her eyes. "All these years, Sarah was out there, struggling, and her son, our grandson, living on the streets. How did we let this happen?" Victor's face crumpled, the weight of his guilt finally breaking through his carefully constructed facade. "It's my fault, Sophia. All of it. I drove her away with my anger, my foolish pride, and now it might be too late to make things right." Sophia stood, crossing the room to embrace her husband. "It's not too late," she said firmly. "Alex is here now. And wherever Sarah is, we'll find her. We'll make this right, Victor." As they stood there, clinging to each other and to the hope of redemption, a soft knock on the door interrupted their moment. James's voice came through, tinged with concern. "Mom? Dad? Is everything okay?" Victor took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. "Come in, son," he called out. "There's something we need to tell you." James entered, his eyes darting between his parents, taking in their emotional state. "What's going on? Alex is getting worried. He thinks he's done something wrong." "Sit down, James," Victor said, gesturing to a chair. "What we're about to tell you, it's going to change everything." Over the next hour, Victor and Sophia recounted the whole story. Sarah's pregnancy, the terrible argument that led to her running away, and the years of fruitless searching that followed. James listened in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process the revelation that the boy currently playing in their backyard was, in fact, his nephew. "But how can we be sure?" James asked finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I mean, it seems impossible. After all this time." Victor handed him the locket and the old photograph. As James studied them, his eyes widened in recognition. "It's true," he whispered. "Alex is He's family. The three sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Sophia who finally spoke up. "What do we do now? How do we tell Alex?" Victor stood, a new determination in his eyes. "We tell him the truth, all of it. He deserves to know who he is, where he comes from, and then we find Sarah. It's time to bring our family back together." As they prepared to leave the study, to face Alex with their newfound knowledge, none of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The road to reconciliation would be long and fraught with obstacles, but in that moment, united by the hope of healing old wounds, the Hawthorns felt ready to face whatever came their way. Little did they know that as they stepped out of the study, ready to change Alex's life forever, fate had one more surprise in store. The journey they were about to embark on would test the limits of their love, challenge their understanding of family, and ultimately lead them to a truth even more astounding than they could have imagined. As Victor reached for the door handle, he paused, taking a deep breath. "Whatever happens," he said, looking at his wife and son, "we face it together, as a family." With those words, they stepped out into the hallway, ready to face the future and the young boy who had unknowingly brought their past rushing back to the present. The next chapter of their lives was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Hawthorne family found Alex in the backyard, sitting on a swing, his legs dangling as he gazed out at the meticulously manicured garden. The boy looked small and out of place in the grand setting, a stark reminder of the life he had left behind. As they approached, Alex looked up, his eyes wary. He had sensed the tension at breakfast, had seen the shock on Victor's face when he showed him the locket. Now, as the entire family came towards him with serious expressions, he couldn't help but feel a flutter of fear in his stomach. "Alex," Victor said gently, kneeling down to be at eye level with the boy, "there's something very important we need to talk to you about. Something about your family, your real family." Alex's body tensed, ready to flee. Are you sending me away?" he asked, his voice small and frightened. No, nothing like that," Sophia rushed to assure him, her heart breaking at the fear in his eyes. "In fact, it's quite the opposite." James stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Alex's shoulder. "What we're about to tell you might be a bit of a shock, buddy, but I want you to know that no matter what, you're safe here with us, okay?" Alex nodded slowly, his eyes darting between the three adults. Victor took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. "Alex, do you remember the locket you showed us? The one your mother gave you?" Victor began. When Alex nodded, he continued, "Well, that locket, it belonged to my daughter, Sarah, your mother." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alex's brow furrowed in confusion. But that would mean..." "It means, Alex," Victor said softly, "that I'm your grandfather, and Sophia is your grandmother, and James is your uncle." Alex's eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process this information. But my mum said she didn't know where my dad was, that he didn't know about me." Victor's face crumpled with guilt. "And that's my fault, Alex, your mother, Sarah. She left home before you were born. There was a terrible argument. Things were said that should never have been said. I drove her away with my anger and my pride. I've regretted it every day since." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes, a mixture of confusion, anger, and a desperate hope he couldn't quite suppress. "If you're my family, why didn't you find us? Why did you let us struggle? Why did you let my mum..." His voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. Sophia moved forward, her own eyes shining with tears. "Oh, Alex, we tried to find her, your mother. For years, we searched. But Sarah, she didn't want to be found. We had no idea she had a child, that you existed. If we had known, we would have moved heaven and earth to find you," Victor finished, his voice thick with emotion, "to bring you both home, where you belong." Alex sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this new information with everything he had believed about his life, his family. Part of him wanted to believe it, to throw himself into the arms of these people who claimed to be his family. But another part, the part that had learned to survive on the streets, warned him to be cautious. How can you be sure?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor reached into his pocket, pulling out the old photograph he had shown Sophia earlier. "Look, Alex. This is me when I was about your age." As Alex studied the photo, his eyes widened in recognition. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dark hair, the same set of the jaw, even the same little furrow between the eyebrows when concentrating. "It's true," Alex breathed, looking up at Victor with new eyes. You're really my grandfather." Victor nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Yes, Alex, and we want you to stay here with us, to be part of our family, the family you should have had all along." For a moment, Alex sat frozen, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he had just learned. Then, with a small sob, he launched himself into Victor's arms. Victor held him tightly, years of pent-up love and regret pouring out as he embraced his grandson for the first time. Sophia and James joined the embrace, enveloping Alex in the warmth of family he had been missing for so long. For several minutes, they stayed like that, tears mingling as years of separation began to heal. As they finally pulled apart, Alex wiped his eyes, a mixture of emotions playing across his face. "But what about my mom?" he asked. Is she really—" Victor shook his head firmly. "We don't know for sure, Alex. You said she was sick, but, well, your mother was always a fighter. We won't give up hope. We'll do everything in our power to find her, to bring her home too." Alex nodded, a small spark of hope igniting in his chest. Can you tell me about her? About when she was young?" Sophia smiled warmly, brushing a strand of hair from Alex's forehead. "Of course, sweetheart. We have so many stories to share with you. Why don't we go inside and we can start from the beginning?" As they made their way back to the house, Alex, walking between Victor and Sophia, his small hand clasped tightly in his grandfather's, none of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The road to becoming a true family would be long and often difficult, filled with adjustments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But in that moment, as they crossed the threshold into the Hawthorne home, Alex's home now too, there was a sense of rightness, of pieces finally falling into place. The family that had been fractured for so long was taking its first steps towards healing, towards becoming whole again. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of their journey. As they settled in the living room, ready to share stories of Sarah and the family Alex had never known, fate was already setting in motion events that would test their newfound bond, challenge their understanding of forgiveness, and ultimately lead them to a truth even more astonishing than they could have imagined. The Hawthorne family saga was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning anew, with Alex at its heart. And as Victor began to speak, sharing tales of a young Sarah that brought both laughter and tears, the future stretched out before them, uncertain, yes, but full of hope, and the promise of love reclaimed. The days following the revelation of Alex's true identity were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for the Hawthorne family. The grand mansion, once a symbol of their isolated wealth, now bustled with a new energy as they all worked to make Alex feel at home. Victor, usually consumed by business affairs, found himself spending hours with Alex, sharing stories of Sarah's childhood and poring over old family photo albums. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing years of pent-up love and memories. One afternoon, as they sat in Victor's study, Alex traced his finger over a photo of Sarah as a teenager. "She looks so happy here," he said softly. Victor nodded, his eyes misty with nostalgia. She was. Sarah had such a zest for life. She could light up a room just by walking into it. He paused, his expression growing somber. "I just wish I had appreciated that more when I had the chance." Alex looked up at his grandfather, sensing the weight of regret in his words. Do you think she ever wanted to come back?" Victor sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I hope so, Alex. Not a day went by that I didn't wish for it, but I was too proud, too stubborn to reach out first. It's a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life." As they continued to look through the albums, Alex's eyes fell on a photo of a younger Victor standing in front of a large building. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the image. Victor's eyes lit up. "Ah, that's the first Hawthorne Industries building. It's where it all began." He launched into the story of how he built his company from the ground up, his voice filled with pride and nostalgia. Alex listened, enraptured by tales of business deals and technological innovations. For the first time, he began to understand the legacy he was now a part of. Meanwhile, Sophia threw herself into making Alex feel at home. She took him shopping for new clothes, enrolled him in the best private school in the city, and even began redecorating one of the guest rooms to make it truly his own. "What color would you like for your walls, dear?" she asked one day, surrounded by paint swatches and fabric samples. Alex, overwhelmed by the choices, shrugged uncertainly. I don't know. I've never had my own room before." Sophia's heart clenched at the reminder of Alex's difficult past. She knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. "Well then, this is your chance to have everything you've ever dreamed of. Sky's the limit, sweetheart." After some gentle encouragement, Alex chose a deep blue for the walls, reminding him of the night sky he used to gaze at when he lived on the streets. Sophia made a mental note to have glow-in-the-dark stars added to the ceiling. James, for his part, found himself in the unexpected role of uncle. He took Alex to soccer practices, helped him with homework, and even taught him how to ride a bike, something Alex had never had the chance to learn before. One Saturday afternoon, as they rode through the park, Alex suddenly stopped, his face serious. "Uncle James," he said, the title still feeling new on his tongue, "do you think my mom would be happy that I'm here with you guys?" James dismounted his bike, crouching down to Alex's level. "I think she'd be overjoyed, buddy. All your mom ever wanted was for you to be safe, loved, and happy. And that's exactly what we want too." As Alex nodded, a small smile playing on his lips, James couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of this young boy who had been through so much. But not everything was smooth sailing. Alex still had nightmares, waking up in cold sweats, calling out for his mother. He struggled to adjust to the structure and expectations of his new school, where his background set him apart from his wealthy classmates. One evening, after a particularly rough day at school, Alex retreated to his room, refusing to come down for dinner. Victor found him curled up on his bed, tears streaming down his face. "Alex," Victor said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "What's wrong, son?" Alex sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I don't belong here," he mumbled. "Everyone at school knows I'm different. They whisper about me, about where I came from. Maybe it would be better if I just left." Victor felt his heart break at the pain in Alex's voice. He gently pulled the boy into his arms, holding him close. "Alex, listen to me. You belong here more than anyone. You're a Hawthorne through and through, and more importantly, you're loved, so very loved." As Alex's sobs quieted, Victor made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to make Alex feel secure, to give him the childhood he deserved. And he would never stop searching for Sarah, never stop hoping for the day when their family could truly be whole again. Little did Victor know that his determination would soon be put to the test. As the Hawthornes worked to build their new normal, forces beyond their control were already in motion, setting the stage for challenges that would shake their newfound family to its very core. In the quiet of Alex's room, as grandfather and grandson held each other, the future stretched out before them. Uncertain, yes, but full of love, hope, and the promise of a family united against whatever storms may come. As autumn painted the city in hues of gold and crimson, the Hawthorne family settled into a new rhythm. Alex, slowly but surely, was blossoming in his new environment. His nightmares became less frequent, his smiles more genuine. The halls of the once austere mansion now echoed with the sound of a child's laughter, breathing new life into the old house. However, not everyone was thrilled with the changes in the Hawthorne household. Victor's sudden shift in priorities had not gone unnoticed in the business world. Board members whispered, competitors circled like sharks scenting blood in the water, and the press buzzed with speculation about the mysterious child who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. One crisp October morning, as Victor sat at the breakfast table helping Alex with his math homework, James burst into the room, his face grim. "Dad, we have a problem," he said, tossing a newspaper onto the table. Victor's eyes widened as he took in the headline, "Hawthorne Heir Apparent, Street Urchin or Secret Love Child." Beneath it was a grainy photo of Alex playing soccer in the backyard, clearly taken with a long-range lens. "How dare they?" Sophia gasped, snatching up the paper. "He's just a child." Alex, sensing the tension, looked up from his textbook. "What's wrong? Did I do something bad?" Victor quickly folded the newspaper, forcing a smile. "No, Alex, you've done nothing wrong. This is adult stuff, nothing for you to worry about." But as Alex returned to his homework, Victor exchanged a worried glance with James and Sophia. They had known this day would come, but they had hoped for more time to prepare, to protect Alex from the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. Later that day, in the privacy of Victor's study, the family gathered to discuss their next move. "We need to get ahead of this," James argued. "Issue a statement, control the narrative." Sophia shook her head. "And say what?" "We can't expose Alex to that kind of attention. He's been through enough already." Victor listened to their debate, his mind racing. Finally, he held up a hand, silencing them both. "We do nothing," he said firmly. "Nothing," James echoed, incredulous. "Dad, we can't just ignore this. The vultures are circling. If we don't act, they'll tear us apart." Victor stood, pacing the room. "Let them try. Our focus right now is on Alex, on giving him the stability and security he needs. I won't have that jeopardized by some tabloid witch hunt." As they continued to discuss their options, none of them noticed the small figure lingering just outside the study door. Alex pressed himself against the wall, his heart pounding as he listened to the adults argue about him, about the trouble his presence was causing. That night, as the mansion settled into silence, Alex lay awake in his bed, his mind whirling with overheard conversations and imagined scenarios. Was he really causing so much trouble for the Hawthorns? Would it be better if he just disappeared? With a heavy heart and tears in his eyes, Alex made a decision. Quietly, he slipped out of bed and began to pack a small bag with clothes and the few possessions he had accumulated during his time with the Hawthorns. As an afterthought, he grabbed the locket, the one tangible connection to his mother and his past. Just before dawn, Alex crept down the stairs, pausing in the grand foyer to look around one last time at the place that had briefly been his home. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the silent house. "It's better this way." With that, he slipped out the front door and into the misty morning, disappearing into the streets he once knew so well. Hours later, the Hawthorne household erupted into chaos as they discovered Alex's empty bed. Victor, his face ashen with fear and guilt, coordinated with local authorities to begin a search. Sophia sobbed quietly in the kitchen, clutching Alex's favorite stuffed animal. James paced the floor, making call after call to his contacts in the city. As the day wore on with no sign of Alex, Victor found himself standing in the boy's room, his eyes roaming over the star-speckled ceiling and the blue walls that had brought Alex so much joy. His gaze fell on a crumpled piece of paper on the desk, a half-finished letter in Alex's childish scrawl. "Dear Grandpa," it read, "I'm sorry for causing so much trouble. You've all been so nice to me, but I heard you talking about how hard it is to have me here. I don't want to make things bad for you. I think it's better if I go away. Please don't be sad. I'll be okay. I know how to take care of myself. Thank you for showing me what a family is like. I'll never forget you. Love, Alex." Victor sank to his knees, the letter clutched to his chest as sobs racked his body. How had he failed so spectacularly? How had he let Alex believe, even for a moment, that he was anything less than the most precious gift their family had ever received? As Victor wept, vowing to move heaven and earth to bring Alex home, he was unaware of the wheels already in motion. For Alex's disappearance had not gone unnoticed by others who had been watching the Hawthorne family with great interest. In a small apartment across town, a woman stared at a news report about the missing Hawthorne heir, her hand flying to her mouth in shock as she recognized the boy's face. It was a face she knew all too well, a face she had dreamed of every night for the past year. "Alex," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "My baby." Sarah Hawthorne, very much alive and now fully recovered, felt her world tilt on its axis. Her son, whom she had entrusted to the care of a friend before her illness overtook her, was now at the center of a media frenzy, and in the care of the very family she had fled from all those years ago. As Sarah grabbed her coat and keys, determination etched on her face. The stage was set for a reunion that would shake the Hawthorne family to its very foundations. The past and present were about to collide in ways none of them could have imagined, and at the center of it all was Alex, a boy lost in more ways than one, unknowingly setting in motion events that would change all their lives forever. The search for Alex was not just a search for a missing child. It was a race against time, a desperate attempt to bring together a family torn apart by pride, misunderstanding, and the cruel twists of fate. And as the city held its breath, waiting to see how this drama would unfold, the Hawthorns clung to hope. Hope that they would find Alex, hope that they could make things right, and hope that somehow, some way, they could become the family they were always meant to be. The city pulsed with nervous energy as news of Alex's disappearance spread. What had started as a local story quickly ballooned into national headlines, the mysterious Hawthorne heir capturing the public's imagination. Speculation ran rampant, with theories ranging from kidnapping to an elaborate publicity stunt. For the Hawthorns, however, the media circus was the least of their concerns. Their world had narrowed to a single focus: finding Alex. Victor threw himself into the search with a fervor that surprised even those who knew him best. The man who had once moved markets with a single phone call now prowled the streets, showing Alex's photo to anyone who would look. His voice, usually so commanding, grew hoarse from calling Alex's name down every alley and side street. James coordinated with the police, using every connection and resource at his disposal. He set up a command center in the mansion's library, walls covered with maps and possible sightings, phones ringing constantly with tips and leads. Sophia, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, focused on keeping their home ready for Alex's return. She baked his favorite cookies, fluffed his pillows, and sat by his bedroom window for hours, praying for a glimpse of his small figure coming up the driveway. As day turned to night and back again, the strain began to show on all of them. Victor, slumped in his study chair after another fruitless search, looked up as James entered the room. "Anything?" Victor asked, hope and dread warring in his voice. James shook his head, his own exhaustion evident. "Nothing concrete. But we've got teams canvassing every shelter and soup kitchen in the city. If he's out there, Dad, we'll find him." Victor nodded, his eyes falling on the crumpled note Alex had left behind. "He thinks he's protecting us, James. My grandson is out there alone and afraid because he thinks he's a burden to us." His voice broke on the last words, tears threatening to spill over. James moved to his father's side, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll make it right, Dad. When we find him, and we will find him, we'll make sure he never doubts his place in this family again." As they sat in somber silence, Sophia burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "I think I might have something," she exclaimed, waving a piece of paper. "I was going through Alex's things, hoping to find a clue, and I found this." She handed the paper to Victor. It was a flyer for a local community center, advertising free art classes for children. "Alex mentioned wanting to learn how to draw," Sophia explained. "He was too shy to ask for lessons, but I saw him looking at this flyer. It's in an area he knew from before. He might have gone there." Hope flared in Victor's chest. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had in days. "Let's go," he said, already reaching for his coat. Across town, oblivious to the search underway, Alex huddled in the back corner of the community center's art room. He had snuck in during a class, blending in with the other children. Now, as night fell and the center emptied, he remained hidden, using his street smarts to evade the closing staff. In the quiet of the empty building, Alex pulled out his sketchpad, a gift from Sophia that he couldn't bear to leave behind. With trembling hands, he began to draw, pouring his confusion and longing onto the paper. First, he sketched the Hawthorne mansion, its imposing facade softened by the warm glow of lights in the windows. Then smaller figures in front, Victor with his kind eyes and strong hands, Sophia, her arms open wide as if waiting for a hug, James, a soccer ball at his feet and a grin on his face. As Alex drew, tears began to fall, smudging the pencil lines. He missed them so much it hurt, but he convinced himself that this was for the best. They would be better off without him, without the complications he brought to their lives. A noise startled Alex from his reverie. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing closer. Panicked, he scrambled to gather his things, looking for a way out. But before he could move, the door opened, spilling light into the darkened room. Alex froze, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, familiar yet strange. As Alex's eyes adjusted to the light, he gasped, the sketchpad falling from his suddenly numb fingers. For there, looking as shocked as Alex felt, stood a woman he had only seen in his dreams and in faded photographs. A woman he had mourned, had longed for every day since her disappearance. "Mom?" Alex whispered, his voice small and disbelieving. Sarah Hawthorne stepped into the room, her eyes never leaving her son's face. "Alex," she breathed, her voice choked with emotion. "Oh, my baby. I've found you." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a cry that was half sob, half laughter, Alex launched himself into his mother's arms. Sarah caught him, holding him tight, her tears falling freely into his hair. "I thought you were gone," Alex cried, his words muffled against her shoulder. "They told me you were never coming back." Sarah pulled back slightly, cupping Alex's face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never meant to leave you. I got so sick and I was scared. I thought I was protecting you by sending you away, but I got better, and I've been searching for you ever since." As mother and son clung to each other, reveling in their miraculous reunion, neither was aware of the approaching footsteps in the hallway. The Hawthorns, following Sophia's hunch, had arrived at the community center. Victor was the first to reach the art room door. He pushed it open, his mouth already forming Alex's name. But the words died on his lips as he took in the scene before him. There, in the middle of the room, stood his long-lost daughter, holding the grandson he had only just found. Sarah looked up at the sound of the door, her eyes widening as they met Victor's. "Dad," she gasped, instinctively tightening her hold on Alex. Victor stood frozen, unable to believe his eyes. Behind him, Sophia and James crowded into the doorway, their own shock evident on their faces. The air in the room grew thick with tension, years of unspoken words and buried emotions swirling between them. Alex, sensing the change, looked between his mother and the Hawthorns, confusion and fear battling on his young face. In that moment, standing on the precipice of either reconciliation or further heartbreak, the Hawthorne family faced its greatest challenge yet. The past and present had collided in a way none of them could have predicted, and the future hung in the balance. As they stood there, each grappling with the enormity of the moment, one thing became crystal clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The journey that had begun with a stolen chocolate had led them here, to a crossroads that would define their family for generations to come. With hearts pounding and emotions running high, they prepared to face the truth, confront the past, and perhaps, just perhaps, forge a new future together. The silence in the art room was deafening, broken only by the soft sound of Alex's sniffles as he clung to his mother. Sarah stood rigid, her arms protectively around her son, eyes darting between Victor, Sophia, and James. The air crackled with tension, years of unspoken words and buried emotions threatening to explode. It was Alex who finally broke the stalemate. "Grandpa," he said hesitantly, his small voice cutting through the tension. You found me." Victor's face softened as he looked at his grandson. "Of course we did, Alex. We'll always find you." His gaze shifted to Sarah, a storm of emotions playing across his features. "Both of you." Sarah tensed, her grip on Alex tightening. How long have you known about Alex?" "Not long," Sophia interjected gently, taking a tentative step into the room. "Sarah, honey, we had no idea. If we had known..." "You would have what?" Sarah snapped, years of hurt and anger bubbling to the surface. "Welcomed us with open arms? After everything that happened?" James moved to stand beside his parents, his face a mixture of joy at seeing his sister and wariness at her hostility. "Sarah, please, we've all made mistakes, but we're here now. We want to make things right." Alex looked up at his mother, confusion evident on his face. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you angry at them?" Sarah took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm herself for Alex's sake. "It's complicated, sweetheart. There's a lot of history here." Victor stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "Sarah, please. Can we talk? Really talk? There's so much to say, so much to explain." For a moment it seemed Sarah might refuse. But then Alex tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "they've been really nice to me. They took care of me when I thought you were gone." Sarah looked down at her son, then back at her family. The anger in her eyes warred with a longing she couldn't quite hide. Finally she nodded. "All right, we'll talk, but not here. The mansion, Sophia suggested hesitantly. It's private and it's your home, Sarah. It always has been. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah agreed. The group made their way out of the community center, the short drive to the Hawthorne estate filled with a tense silence. As they entered the mansion, Alex's hand firmly in hers, Sarah couldn't help but be struck by how little had changed. The same imposing portraits lined the walls, the same plush carpets muffled their footsteps. It was as if the past 18 years had never happened. They gathered in the living room, an odd tableau of reunion and estrangement. Alex, sensing the gravity of the moment, sat close to his mother on the sofa. Victor and Sophia took the chairs opposite, while James leaned against the fireplace, his posture tense. "Why don't you start, Sarah?" Victor said softly. Tell us everything." Sarah took a deep breath, her hand absently stroking Alex's hair. "What do you want to know? How I survived on the streets when I was pregnant, how I gave birth in a shelter, how I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Or how about how it felt to think I was dying, to send my son away because I thought it was his only chance?" Sophia let out a small sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Victor leaned forward, his face etched with pain. "Sarah, if we had known, we looked for you. For years we searched." "Not hard enough," Sarah retorted, but some of the fire had gone out of her voice. She just sounded tired now. "I was out there, Dad, struggling, scared, alone. Where were you then?" "I'm so sorry," Victor whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong, Sarah, so terribly wrong. When you told me you were pregnant, I reacted out of fear and pride. I said things, horrible things that I've regretted every day since. By the time I came to my senses, you were gone." Alex, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Is that why you ran away, Mum? Because Grandpa was mad about me?" Sarah hugged Alex close. "Oh, sweetheart, no, it wasn't your fault. It was grown-up stuff. I made choices. Your grandfather made choices. We all made mistakes." James, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Sarah, we missed you every day. Christmas, birthdays. They were never the same without you. We never stopped hoping you'd come home." Sarah looked at her brother, really looked at him for the first time since their reunion. The boy she remembered had grown into a man, his eyes holding a wisdom that came from years of worrying about her. "I missed you too, Jamie," she said softly, using his childhood nickname. As the night wore on, stories were shared, tears were shed, and slowly, tentatively, bridges began to be rebuilt. Alex, overwhelmed by the emotions swirling around him, eventually dozed off, his head in Sarah's lap. Looking down at her sleeping son, Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "I never stopped loving you," she admitted quietly. "Any of you. I was just so scared, so hurt. And then when I got sick, all I could think about was protecting Alex." Victor knelt beside the sofa, gently taking Sarah's free hand in his. "We love you, Sarah. We always have. And we love Alex. Please give us a chance to be a family again." Sarah looked at her father, seeing not the stern, unyielding man of her youth, but a grandfather desperate to connect with his family. She glanced around the room at Sophia's hopeful face, at James's encouraging nod. Finally, she looked down at Alex, peaceful in sleep, unaware of the momentous decision being made. This boy, who had known so much hardship in his young life, deserved a family. A real family. "Okay," Sarah said softly, squeezing Victor's hand. "We'll try. For Alex." As dawn broke over the Hawthorne estate, casting a golden light through the windows, a family torn apart by pride and misunderstanding took its first tentative steps toward healing. There would be challenges ahead, old wounds to mend, and new bonds to forge. But in that moment, surrounded by the people who loved them most, Sarah and Alex were finally home. The journey that had begun with a stolen chocolate had led them here to a new beginning filled with hope, forgiveness, and the promise of a future together. As the Hawthorne family embraced, tears of joy mingling with tears of relief, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. For in the end it was love, messy, complicated, enduring love that had brought them back together, and it was love that would see them through whatever lay ahead. The days following the emotional reunion of the Hawthorne family were filled with a mixture of joy, awkwardness, and cautious optimism. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and isolation, now buzzed with the energy of a family trying to reconnect and rebuild. Sarah and Alex moved into a suite of rooms on the second floor, close enough to be part of the family, but with enough privacy to retreat when things became overwhelming. For Sarah, being back in her childhood home was a surreal experience. Every corner held memories, some sweet, some painful, all a reminder of the life she had left behind. One morning, as Sarah stood in the hallway outside her old room, lost in thought, Sophia approached her cautiously. "Sarah, dear," Sophia said softly, "I was wondering if you'd like to help me in the garden today. The roses need pruning, and I remember how much you loved working with the flowers when you were young." Sarah hesitated, memories of peaceful afternoons spent tending to the garden with her mother flooding back. I'd like that," she finally replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. As they worked side by side in the garden, the familiar scent of roses surrounding them, the years of separation seemed to melt away. They talked of small things at first, the weather, the best way to encourage blooms, Alex's favorite flowers, but as the morning wore on, their conversation deepened. "I never stopped thinking about you, you know," Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every Mother's Day, every Christmas, I'd set a place for you at the table just in case." Sarah's hands stilled, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought about you too, Mom, especially when Alex was born. I wished you were there, to show me what to do, to tell me it would be okay." Sophia reached out, gently squeezing Sarah's hand. "I'm here now, sweetheart. For both of you." Meanwhile, Victor was facing his own challenges in reconnecting with his daughter and grandson. He had always expressed love through grand gestures and material comfort, but he was quickly learning that Sarah and Alex needed something different. One afternoon, he found Alex sitting alone in the library, looking lost among the towering bookshelves. "Hey there, champ," Victor said, trying to keep his voice light. "What are you up to?" Alex shrugged, his fingers tracing the spine of a nearby book. "Just looking. There are so many books here." Victor's heart clenched at the wonder in Alex's voice. He sat down next to his grandson, his mind racing for a way to connect. "You know, your mother used to love reading when she was your age. She'd spend hours in here, lost in different worlds." Alex's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? What kind of books did she like?" Victor chuckled, memories flooding back. "Oh, all kinds. But she had a special love for adventure stories. There was one about a young explorer that she read so many times the binding fell apart." As Victor began to recount Sarah's favorite childhood stories, Alex leaned in, hanging on every word. For the first time, grandfather and grandson found common ground, building a bridge through shared stories and imagination. James, too, was working to forge a relationship with his newfound nephew. He took Alex to soccer practices, helped him with homework, and even started teaching him the basics of the family business. One evening, as they sat together reviewing Alex's math homework, James noticed the boy seemed distracted. "Everything okay, buddy?" James asked, setting aside the textbook. Alex fidgeted with his pencil, avoiding eye contact. "Uncle James," he said hesitantly, do you think Mom and Grandpa will ever stop being mad at each other?" James sighed, realizing how perceptive Alex was to the underlying tension in the house. "They're not mad exactly," he explained gently. "They're just trying to figure things out. Your Mom and Grandpa love each other very much, but sometimes love can be complicated." Alex nodded slowly, processing this. "Like how Mom says she loves me even when I mess up?" James smiled, ruffling Alex's hair affectionately. "Exactly like that. Family loves each other no matter what, even when things are tough." As the weeks passed, the Hawthorne family slowly began to heal. There were still moments of tension, of old hurts resurfacing, but there were also moments of laughter, of shared meals, of new memories being made. Sarah, watching Alex flourish under the love and attention of his grandparents and uncle, felt her walls starting to crumble. The anger and resentment she had carried for so long began to give way to a cautious hope for the future. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room after dinner, Alex asleep with his head in Sarah's lap, Victor cleared his throat nervously. "Sarah," he began, his voice gentle, I've been thinking. I know it might be too soon, but I wanted to discuss the possibility of you and Alex staying here permanently. This is your home, it always has been, and we would love nothing more than to have you both here with us. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her family, hopeful, loving, and a little scared. She thought of the struggles she and Alex had faced, of the lonely years on their own, and she thought of the past few weeks, of the warmth and love that had surrounded them despite the awkwardness and tension. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made a decision that would change all their lives. "I think," she said slowly, "that we'd like that very much." The room erupted in quiet joy, with Sophia wiping away tears and James grinning from ear to ear. Victor, overcome with emotion, simply reached out and took Sarah's hand, squeezing it gently. As the Hawthorne family embraced this new chapter in their lives, none of them could have predicted the challenges and joys that lay ahead. But in that moment, surrounded by love and the promise of a future together, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. The journey that had begun with a lost boy and a stolen chocolate had led them here, to a new beginning filled with hope, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As night fell over the Hawthorne estate, a sense of peace settled over the house, a family once fractured now whole again, ready to write the next chapter of their story together. As autumn gave way to winter, the Hawthorne mansion transformed alongside its inhabitants. The once formal rooms now echoed with laughter, the pristine surfaces marked by evidence of a child's presence, a toy car here, a crayon drawing there. It was as if the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief, finally fulfilling its purpose as a true family home. Sarah, having agreed to stay, found herself navigating the delicate balance of reintegrating into the family while maintaining her independence. She had spent years making decisions on her own, and the sudden presence of so many well-meaning voices could be overwhelming at times. One chilly afternoon, Sarah stood in the kitchen, attempting to recreate a simple pasta dish she used to make for Alex when money was tight. As she struggled with the unfamiliar high-end equipment, Sophia entered, immediately sensing her daughter's frustration. "Need a hand, dear?" Sophia offered gently. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to prove she could manage on her own. But looking at her mother's kind face, she felt her resolve soften. "Actually, yes," she admitted. "I can't seem to get this sauce right." As they worked side by side, Sophia sharing cooking tips and Sarah recounting humorous stories of her culinary mishaps over the years, a new understanding began to form between mother and daughter. It wasn't just about the food, it was about building a bridge between their past and present, creating new memories to cherish. Meanwhile, Victor was facing his own challenges in the business world. His decision to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on his family had not been well received by some board members. Rumors of a potential takeover bid were swirling, and the pressure to return to his old workaholic ways was mounting. One evening, as Victor sat in his study poring over financial reports, Alex peeked in, clutching a board game. "Grandpa," he said hesitantly, "Mom said you're working, but I was wondering if maybe you wanted to play a game with me." Victor looked up, seeing the hope in his grandson's eyes. In that moment, the choice became crystal clear. Smiling, he set aside the reports and stood up. "You know what, Alex? I would love to play a game with you. In fact, why don't we make it a family game night?" Soon, the entire Hawthorne family was gathered in the living room, laughing and playfully arguing over Monopoly. As Victor watched Sarah teach Alex the finer points of property management, he felt a warmth in his chest that no business success could ever match. The next day, Victor called an emergency board meeting. Standing before the skeptical faces of his executives, he made a declaration that would reshape the future of Hawthorne Industries. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice firm with conviction, "for years, I've preached that our company's greatest asset is its people. It's time I lived up to those words. From this day forward, Hawthorne Industries will be implementing comprehensive family-friendly policies, starting with extended parental leave and flexible working hours." The room erupted in a mix of surprise and skepticism, but Victor stood his ground. He knew that this decision might cost him in the short term, but the lessons he had learned about the true value of family were worth more than any profit margin. As news of Hawthorne Industries' new direction spread, something unexpected happened. Employee morale soared, productivity increased, and the company's public image transformed overnight. What had seemed like a risky move turned into a revolutionary shift in corporate culture, with other companies scrambling to follow suit. Back at the mansion, James was grappling with his own role in the family's new dynamic. As the one who had been there throughout the years of separation, he sometimes felt caught between his parents and his sister, unsure of where he fit in. One Saturday morning, James found Sarah in the garage struggling to change a tire on her old car. "Need some help?" he offered, grabbing a wrench. Sarah looked up, a smudge of grease on her cheek. "I've got it," she said automatically, then paused. "Actually, you know what? Yeah, I could use a hand." As they worked together, trading stories and gentle teasing, James felt the last of the awkwardness between them melt away. This was his sister, his best friend from childhood, and she was finally home. "I missed this," James said softly as they finished up. "Having you around, I mean. It's good to have my big sister back." Sarah smiled, bumping her shoulder against his. "I missed you too, little brother. More than you know." As winter deepened, the Hawthorne family faced each new challenge together. There were still moments of tension, of old habits and hurts resurfacing, but they were learning to navigate these waters with patience and love. Alex, thriving under the love and stability of his newfound family, was blossoming. His grades improved, his nightmares became less frequent, and his laughter echoed through the halls of the mansion more often than not. One snowy evening, as the family sat around the fireplace sipping hot chocolate, Alex looked around at the faces of his loved ones and felt a sense of peace he had never known before. "Mom," he said, snuggling closer to Sarah, "are we going to stay here forever?" Sarah met Victor's eyes over Alex's head, saw the hope and love shining there, and knew her answer with certainty. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, hugging him close. "This is our home now. Forever." As the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, the Hawthorne family basked in the warmth of their togetherness. They had weathered storms, faced their past, and emerged stronger for it. The road ahead would not always be smooth, but they would face whatever came their way as they had learned to do, together, as a family. The journey that had begun with a lost boy and a stolen chocolate had led them here to a place of healing, forgiveness, and unconditional love. As they sat together, sharing stories and dreams for the future, they knew that this moment, this love, this family, was the greatest treasure of all. And somewhere, in the heart of the old mansion that had seen so much joy and sorrow, a new chapter was beginning. A chapter filled with promise, with laughter, with the unbreakable bonds of a family reunited. The Hawthorne legacy, once built on business acumen and material success, was being redefined by something far more precious: the enduring power of love and the true meaning of home. As spring blossomed around the Hawthorne estate, bringing new life to the gardens Sarah and Sophia had lovingly tended together, the family found themselves facing a new set of challenges. The initial euphoria of their reunion had settled into a more complex reality, one that required patience, understanding, and constant communication. Sarah, having lived independently for so long, sometimes struggled with the well-intentioned involvement of her parents in her and Alex's lives. One sunny afternoon, as she was helping Alex with his homework in the sunroom, Victor entered with an excited gleam in his eye. "I've got great news," he announced, brandishing a brochure. "I've found the perfect private school for Alex. Top-notch education, excellent extracurriculars, and I've already spoken to the headmaster about admission." Sarah felt a familiar tension creep into her shoulders. "Dad," she said, trying to keep her voice level, "I appreciate the thought, but Alex and I are happy with his current school. We don't need—" "But Sarah," Victor interrupted, his enthusiasm undimmed, "this is the best school in the state. Alex deserves the very best, and with the Hawthorne name—" "The Hawthorne name?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "Dad, I've spent years making sure Alex knows his worth isn't tied to a name or money. We're not changing schools just because you think it's best." Alex looked between his mother and grandfather, his young face creased with worry. Victor, sensing the rising tension, took a step back. I'm sorry, Sarah. I just thought—" "I know what you thought," Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "But Alex and I need to make these decisions together. as a team, just like we always have. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. It was Alex who finally spoke up, his voice small but determined. "I like my school," he said, looking at Victor. "I have friends there, but maybe I could do some extra classes or something." "If you think it's important, Grandpa." Victor's face softened as he looked at his grandson. "That's very thoughtful of you, Alex, but your mother's right. These decisions are for you two to make. I'm sorry if I overstepped." As Victor left the room, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: frustration at her father's presumption, guilt at her sharp reaction, and a deep, abiding love for her son's attempt at peacemaking. She pulled Alex into a hug, marveling at his emotional intelligence. "You're a good kid, you know that," she murmured into his hair. Alex hugged her back tightly. "We're going to be okay here, right, Mom?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, baby, we're going to be just fine." Meanwhile, James was facing his own set of challenges at Hawthorne Industries. The progressive policies Victor had implemented were showing positive results, but not everyone was on board with the changes. Some longtime executives saw the shift as a sign of weakness, a departure from the cutthroat business practices that had made the company successful. One particularly tense board meeting left James feeling drained and questioning his ability to carry on his father's legacy. As he sat in his office staring out at the city skyline, a soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. Sophia entered, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. "Thought you could use a little pick-me-up," she said, setting the tray down on his desk. James managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mom. It's been a rough day." Sophia sat across from him, her eyes full of understanding. "Want to talk about it?" As James poured out his frustrations and doubts, Sophia listened patiently. When he finished, she reached across the desk and took his hand. "James, do you know why your father chose you to take over the company?" she asked. James shrugged. "Because I'm his son?" Sophia shook her head. "No, it's because you have something he never did at your age: compassion. The ability to see beyond the bottom line to the people whose lives are affected by every decision this company makes." She squeezed his hand gently. "The path you're on isn't easy, but it's the right one. Don't let anyone tell you differently." As James absorbed his mother's words, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He might not be the ruthless businessman some of the old guard wanted, but he was exactly the leader Hawthorne Industries needed for the future. Back at the mansion, Victor found Sarah in the garden, pruning roses with perhaps more force than necessary. He approached cautiously, painfully aware of the misstep he had made earlier. "Sarah," he began, "I owe you an apology. I was out of line earlier." Sarah sighed, setting down her pruning shears. "It's okay, Dad. I know you meant well." "No, it's not okay," Victor insisted. "I promised myself when you came back that I would do better, be better, and at the first opportunity, I fell right back into old habits." He sat down on a nearby bench, patting the space next to him. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah joined him. "When you were growing up," Victor continued, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought I knew what was best for you. I tried to control everything, to shape your life into what I thought it should be, and in doing so I drove you away." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as she listened to her father's words. "I don't want to make the same mistakes with Alex," Victor said, "or with you. You're an incredible mother, Sarah. You've raised a wonderful boy under impossible circumstances. I need to respect that, to support you both without trying to take over." Sarah leaned into her father's side, feeling the familiar comfort of his arm around her shoulders. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. "That means a lot." As they sat together in the garden, surrounded by the roses they both loved, father and daughter began to bridge the gap that years of separation had created. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more missteps along the way, but they were both committed to making it work. Inside the house, Alex watched his mother and grandfather through the window, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't understand all the grown-up stuff that was going on, but he knew one thing for certain: his family, complicated and imperfect as it was the greatest gift he had ever received. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the Hawthorne estate, the family gathered for dinner. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and a sense of belonging that filled the dining room. They were learning, growing, and healing together, one day at a time. The road ahead would have its bumps and detours, but as long as they faced it as a family, the Hawthorns knew they could overcome anything. The legacy they were building now was not one of mere wealth or success, but of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As summer approached, bringing with it long, lazy days and warm nights, the Hawthorn family settled into a rhythm that felt both new and comfortingly familiar. However, their newfound peace was about to be tested in ways they couldn't have anticipated. One sweltering afternoon, as Alex and James were engaged in an spirited water balloon fight on the mansion's sprawling lawn, a sleek black car pulled up the driveway. Sarah, who had been watching the playful battle from the porch, felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized the man stepping out of the vehicle. "Robert," she breathed, her voice a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Victor, who had just joined Sarah on the porch, tensed at the name. "Robert, as in Alex's father," Sarah confirmed, her eyes never leaving the approaching figure. Robert Caldwell, looking every bit the successful lawyer in his tailored suit, strode purposefully towards the house. His eyes locked onto Sarah, a storm of emotions playing across his face. "Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying across the lawn, "we need to talk." The jovial sounds of Alex and James's game faded away as everyone turned to look at the newcomer. Alex, confused by the sudden tension, moved closer to James, who put a protective arm around his nephew's shoulders. Sarah descended the porch steps, meeting Robert halfway. "What are you doing here, Robert?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Sarah remembered all too well. "I saw the news about Alex being found. Why didn't you tell me? I had a right to know." Victor stepped forward, his posture rigid. "I think this conversation should be taken inside," he said firmly, eyeing the curious glances from the household staff. As the adults moved into the house, James knelt down next to a visibly shaken Alex. "Hey, buddy, why don't we go get some ice cream in the kitchen? I bet Mrs. Peterson has a fresh batch of chocolate chip ready." Alex nodded mutely, allowing his uncle to lead him away from the unfolding drama. As they entered the kitchen, Sophia was already there, her face etched with concern. "Is that—" she began, but James shook his head slightly, his eyes darting meaningfully to Alex. Understanding immediately, Sophia plastered on a bright smile. "Who's ready for the best ice cream in the state?" she asked, pulling out bowls and spoons. Meanwhile, in Victor's study, the air was thick with tension. Sarah stood by the window, her arms wrapped protectively around herself, while Robert paced the room. Victor sat behind his desk, his eyes darting between his daughter and the man who had fathered his grandson. "I had a right to know, Sarah," Robert repeated, his voice a mix of anger and hurt. "He's my son too." Sarah whirled to face him, her eyes flashing. "A right? You gave up any rights when you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with us. I was scared and alone, and you just walked away." Robert had the grace to look ashamed. "I was young and stupid," he admitted. "I've regretted it every day since. When I finally got my act together and tried to find you, you were gone. Both of you." Victor leaned forward, his voice carefully controlled. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve here, Mr. Caldwell? Alex has been through enough upheaval in his young life." Robert turned to face Victor, squaring his shoulders. "I want to be part of my son's life. I want the chance to make things right." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Make things right? It's been 9 years, Robert. You can't just walk in here and expect to be Father of the Year." "I know that," Robert said, his voice softening. "But I'm asking for a chance. Just a chance to get to know my son, to be there for him in whatever way I can." The room fell silent as the weight of Robert's request hung in the air. Sarah looked at her father, seeking guidance, support, anything to help her navigate this unexpected turn of events. Victor stood, moving to stand beside his daughter. "This isn't a decision to be made lightly," he said, addressing both Sarah and Robert. "Alex's well-being has to be our primary concern." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "And more importantly, I need to talk to Alex. This affects him more than anyone." Robert opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. "I understand," he said quietly. I'll give you my contact information. Please, just don't take too long. I've missed enough of his life already." As Robert prepared to leave, the sound of laughter drifted in from the kitchen. Alex's voice, bright and carefree, carried through the halls of the mansion. Robert paused, his hand on the doorknob, a look of longing crossing his face. "He sounds happy," he said softly. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "He is happy," she replied. "We've built a good life here." Robert nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. "I'm glad," he said sincerely. "Whatever you decide, Sarah, just know that I'm sorry for everything." As the door closed behind Robert, Sarah felt her knees give way. Victor caught her, guiding her gently to a nearby chair. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, holding her close. "We'll figure this out together." In the kitchen, oblivious to the emotional storm that had just passed through the house, Alex was regaling his grandmother and uncle with the elaborate tale of his and James's water balloon battle. His laughter, pure and uninhibited, echoed through the mansion, a reminder of the joy and innocence they were all striving to protect. As the day wore on and the family gathered for dinner, the tension from earlier lingered in the air. Alex, perceptive as ever, sensed that something was off. "Is everything okay?" he asked, looking around the table at the serious faces of the adults. Sarah reached out, squeezing her son's hand gently. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," she assured him. "We just have some grown-up stuff to figure out, but you don't need to worry about anything, okay?" Alex nodded, not entirely convinced, but willing to accept his mother's words for now. As the conversation around the table slowly returned to normal, Sarah caught her father's eye across the table. Victor gave her a reassuring nod, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. Later that night, as Sarah tucked Alex into bed, she found herself studying his face, searching for traces of Robert in his features. How would Alex react to the news that his father, long absent from his life, now wanted to be a part of it? How would this new development affect the delicate balance they had all worked so hard to achieve? As she kissed Alex goodnight and turned out the light, Sarah knew that the coming days would bring difficult conversations and potentially painful decisions. But as she looked back at her sleeping son, peaceful and secure in the knowledge that he was loved, she felt a surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever storms they might have to weather, the Hawthorne family would face them together. The bonds they had forged, tested by time and strengthened by love, would see them through. As Sarah made her way back downstairs, where she knew her parents and James were waiting to discuss the day's events, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the road ahead. The journey that had begun with a lost boy and a stolen chocolate was far from over. But with every step, every challenge overcome, they were writing a new chapter in the Hawthorne legacy, one of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of family. The days following Robert's unexpected visit were filled with tense conversations and sleepless nights for the Hawthorne family. Sarah found herself torn between her instinct to protect Alex from further upheaval and the nagging voice in her head that whispered about second chances and the importance of knowing one's roots. One evening, as Sarah sat in the garden, lost in thought, James joined her on the bench. "Penny for your thoughts, sis?" he asked gently. Sarah sighed, leaning her head on her brother's shoulder. "I don't know what to do, James. How do I tell Alex about Robert? How do I decide if letting him into our lives is the right thing?" James wrapped an arm around his sister. "There's no easy answer, Sarah. But you're not alone in this. We're all here to support whatever decision you make." As they sat in companionable silence, the sound of laughter drifted from the house. Alex's voice, followed by Victor's deeper chuckle, floated on the evening air. "You know," James said thoughtfully, "Alex is a pretty remarkable kid. He's been through so much, but he's still so open-hearted. Maybe he's strong enough to handle this." Sarah nodded slowly, a plan forming in her mind. "You're right. And maybe it's time I give him a chance to have a say in his own life." The next morning, Sarah asked Alex to join her for a walk around the estate. As they strolled hand in hand, Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "Alex, sweetheart, there's something important I need to talk to you about," she began. Alex looked up at her, his young face serious. "Is this about the man who came to the house? The one that made everyone upset?" Sarah shouldn't have been surprised by her son's perceptiveness, but it still caught her off guard. Yes, it is. Alex, that man, he's your father. Alex's eyes widened, a mix of emotions flashing across his face. My real dad? But I thought he didn't want us. Sarah knelt down, looking her son in the eye. It's complicated, honey. When I told your father about you, we were both very young and scared. He made some mistakes, and so did I. But now he wants to meet you, to be a part of your life. Alex was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Do I have to? He asked finally, his voice small. No, sweetie, Sarah assured him, pulling him into a hug. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. This is a big decision, and I want you to be a part of making it. As they continued their walk, Sarah explained the situation as best she could, answering Alex's questions with honesty and patience. By the time they returned to the house, a tentative plan had been formed. Later that day, the entire family gathered in the living room. Alex, sitting between Sarah and Victor on the sofa, looked around at the faces of the people who had become his world. I think, he said slowly, his voice stronger than Sarah had expected, that I want to meet him just to see. Is that okay? The adults exchanged glances, a mix of pride and concern evident in their expressions. Victor leaned in, placing a gentle hand on Alex's shoulder. Of course it's okay, champ, he said warmly. We're all here for you, no matter what. As Sarah made the call to Robert, setting up a meeting for the following weekend, she felt a strange mix of anxiety and hope. This was uncharted territory for all of them, but they would navigate it together. The day of the meeting arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy that permeated the entire household. Alex, dressed in his favorite t-shirt and jeans, sat on the front steps, his legs swinging anxiously. Sarah sat beside him, running a comforting hand through his hair. Remember, sweetie, if at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to leave, just say the word. This is all on your terms. Alex nodded, leaning into his mother's side. As Robert's car pulled up the driveway, the boy took a deep breath, squaring his small shoulders. Robert stepped out of the car, looking as nervous as Sarah had ever seen him. He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Alex. Hello, Alex, he said softly, crouching down to the boy's level. I'm your dad. It's really good to meet you. Alex studied Robert's face, searching for something only he could see. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he spoke. Hi. Do you like soccer? Robert's face broke into a relieved smile. I love soccer. Do you play? As Alex launched into an excited description of his latest game, Sarah felt some of the tension leave her body. This was just the first step on a long and potentially complicated journey, but seeing the tentative connection forming between father and son gave her hope. The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation, shared meals, and even an impromptu soccer match in the backyard. By the time Robert prepared to leave, there was a cautious optimism in the air. Can he come back sometime? Alex asked Sarah as they waved goodbye to Robert. Sarah hugged her son close. If that's what you want, sweetheart, then yes, we'll make it happen. As the family gathered for dinner that evening, there was a sense of a new chapter beginning. They had faced this challenge together, supporting Alex and each other through the uncertainty. Victor raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, his eyes shining with pride and love, in all its beautiful, complicated forms. As glasses clinked and smiles were exchanged, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The road ahead might not be easy, but with the love and support of her family, she knew they could face anything. Little did they know that their newfound stability was about to be tested in ways they couldn't have imagined. As night fell over the Hawthorne estate, fate was already setting in motion events that would challenge their bonds, test their resolve, and ultimately redefine the very meaning of family. The weeks following Alex's first meeting with Robert saw a gradual shift in the Hawthorne family dynamic. Regular visits were arranged, and slowly but surely, Robert began to carve out a place for himself in Alex's life. While there were moments of awkwardness and uncertainty, the overall transition was smoother than anyone had dared to hope. Sarah watched these developments with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Seeing Alex's face light up when Robert arrived for their outings filled her with joy, but there was also a nagging fear that she couldn't quite shake. Would Robert's presence somehow diminish the bonds Alex had formed with the rest of the family? One sunny Saturday, as Sarah helped Sophia prepare lunch in the kitchen, She voiced her concerns. "Am I doing the right thing, Mom?" she asked, her hands stilling on the salad she was tossing. "Letting Robert into our lives like this?" Sophia paused in her task, turning to face her daughter. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, "I think you're doing an incredibly brave and selfless thing. You're putting Alex's needs first, giving him the chance to know his father." Sarah nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "I just worry. What if he decides he likes his new life with Robert better? What if he doesn't need us anymore?" Sophia pulled Sarah into a tight hug. "That boy adores you, Sarah, and he loves this family. Robert isn't a replacement. He's an addition. Alex's heart is big enough for all of us." As if on cue, the sound of laughter drifted in from the backyard. Sarah and Sophia moved to the window, watching as Victor, James, and Robert engaged in an energetic game of catch with Alex. The boy was beaming, clearly relishing the attention from all the important men in his life. The scene brought a smile to Sarah's face, easing some of the tension she'd been carrying. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. However, fate had other plans for the Hawthorne family. Just as they were settling into their new normal, a phone call arrived that would throw their world into chaos once again. It was a typical weekday evening. The family had gathered for dinner, with Robert joining them as he occasionally did now. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Alex's excited chatter about his day at school. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the comfortable atmosphere. James, being closest, stood to answer it. "Hawthorne residence," he said, then fell silent, listening intently. The color drained from his face as he turned to look at Sarah. "It's for you," he said, his voice strained. It's the hospital." Sarah felt her heart drop as she took the phone. The next few minutes passed in a blur as she listened to the voice on the other end, her family watching with growing concern. When she finally hung up, her hands were shaking. "It's Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The woman who took care of Alex when I was sick. She's had a stroke. They found my contact information in her wallet." The room fell silent as the implications of this news sank in. Mrs. Chen had been more than just a caretaker. She had been a lifeline for Sarah and Alex during their darkest days. And now she was alone and in critical condition. Alex, sensing the gravity of the situation, spoke up. "Is Mrs. Chen going to be okay, Mom? Can we go see her?" Sarah looked at her son, then at the faces of her family, her parents, James, and even Robert, all watching her with concern and support. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. "We need to go to her," Sarah said firmly. "She has no family, no one else to be there for her. We owe her so much." Victor stood, his decision made. "I'll have the jet prepared. We can be there by morning." As the family sprang into action, making hasty travel arrangements and packing bags, Sarah felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Fear for Mrs. Chen's health, anxiety about returning to the city she had fled, and a deep, abiding gratitude for the unwavering support of her family. Robert, who had been quietly observing, approached Sarah. "I know I'm still finding my place here," he said hesitantly, "but if there's anything I can do to help, anything at all, please let me know." Sarah nodded, touched by his offer. "Thank you, Robert. Just being here for Alex, helping him understand what's happening, that would mean a lot." As the Hawthorne family prepared for their unexpected journey, none of them could have anticipated the chain of events that was about to unfold. The city they were rushing towards held not only Mrs. Chen and memories of Sarah and Alex's past struggles, but also secrets that had long been buried. Little did they know that this trip, born out of compassion and loyalty, would lead them to discoveries that would shake the very foundations of their family. As they boarded the private jet in the early hours of the morning, the Hawthornes were embarking on a journey that would test their bonds, challenge their perceptions, and ultimately redefine their understanding of love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The next chapter of their story was about to begin, one that would bring them face to face with shadows of the past and force them to confront truths that would change their lives forever. But as they sat together on the plane, drawing strength from each other's presence, one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as they had faced every other challenge, together as a family. The Hawthorne family arrived in the bustling city as dawn broke, the familiar skyline a stark contrast to the peaceful estate they had left behind. For Sarah, Every street corner and building seemed to hold a memory, some painful, some bittersweet. Alex, wide-eyed and curious, pressed his face against the car window, taking in the sights of the place where he had spent his early years. As they pulled up to the hospital, Sarah felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. She hadn't set foot in this building since the day she had entrusted Alex to Mrs. Chen's care, believing she might never leave its walls alive. Victor, sensing his daughter's distress, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're here with you, Sarah," he said softly. Every step of the way, the family made their way to Mrs. Chen's room, the sterile hospital corridors echoing with their footsteps. When they entered, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Mrs. Chen, the woman who had once been so vibrant and full of life, lay pale and still, hooked up to various machines. Alex approached the bed cautiously, his small hand reaching out to touch Mrs. Chen's. "Is she going to be okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah knelt beside her son, fighting back tears. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're here for her, just like she was there for us." As the family settled in for their vigil, taking turns sitting with Mrs. Chen and exploring the hospital corridors, an unexpected encounter shook their world once again. James, returning from a coffee run, burst into the room, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Sarah," he gasped, "you're not going to believe who I just saw in the lobby." Before Sarah could respond, a figure appeared in the doorway, a face she had never expected to see again. It was Tom, her ex-boyfriend, Alex's biological father. The room fell silent as Tom took in the scene before him. Sarah, Alex, and the entire Hawthorne family gathered around Mrs. Chen's bedside. His eyes widened as they landed on Alex, recognition dawning on his face. "Sarah?" he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and hope. Is he?" Sarah stood, instinctively moving to stand between Tom and Alex. "What are you doing here, Tom?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. Tom took a hesitant step into the room. "My mother. She had a heart attack. She's a few floors down." He paused, his eyes never leaving Alex. "Sarah, is he my son?" The tension in the room was palpable. Victor and Sophia exchanged worried glances, while James moved closer to Alex, ready to whisk him away if needed. Robert, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "I think," he said carefully, "that we all need to have a conversation. But not here. Not now. Mrs. Chen needs peace and quiet to recover." Sarah nodded, grateful for Robert's intervention. "You're right, Tom, we can talk, but not in front of Alex. Not until we figure this out." As the adults prepared to step outside to talk, Alex's voice piped up. "Mom, who is that man? Why does he keep looking at me?" Sarah knelt down, meeting her son's confused gaze. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Remember how we talked about family being more than just blood? Well, this is something like that. I promise we'll explain everything soon." With a final reassuring squeeze of Alex's hand, Sarah followed the others out into the hallway, leaving Sophia to watch over both Alex and Mrs. Chen. In a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, the truth came tumbling out. Tom had never known about the pregnancy, having left for a study abroad program shortly after his and Sarah's breakup. By the time he returned, Sarah and Alex were long gone. "I've thought about you every day," Tom admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I came back ready to apologize, to make things right, but you had vanished. I never stopped looking." Sarah listened, her mind reeling. All these years she had believed Tom had abandoned them, when in reality he had never even known about Alex's existence. As the conversation unfolded, with Robert and the Hawthornes offering support and asking questions, a new reality began to take shape. Alex had not just one, but two fathers who wanted to be part of his life. The family they had been building was about to expand in ways none of them could have anticipated. Back in Mrs. Chen's room, Alex sat quietly, holding the older woman's hand and telling her about his new life with the Hawthornes. As he spoke, Mrs. Chen's fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttering. "Grandma," Alex called out, using the name he had always used for her. "Grandma, can you hear me?" Sophia, who had been dozing in a nearby chair, jerked awake at Alex's excited cry. She rushed to the bedside, just as Mrs. Chen's eyes opened fully, a weak smile spreading across her face as she saw Alex. As the rest of the family rushed back into the room, alerted by Sophia's urgent call, they were met with a sight that brought tears to their eyes. Mrs. Chen, awake and alert, was listening intently as Alex chatted away, catching her up on everything she had missed. In that moment, surrounded by the unconventional family that had come together through a series of chance encounters and choices made from love, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would be complicated, with new relationships to navigate and old wounds to heal. But looking at the faces of the people she loved, her parents, her brother Robert, and now Tom, she knew that together they could face anything. As night fell over the city, the Hawthorne family, expanded and forever changed, began to plan for a future none of them could have imagined. The journey that had begun with a stolen chocolate had led them here, to a place where love knew no boundaries and family was defined not by blood, but by the bonds of the heart. Little did they know that the greatest challenge and the greatest joy was yet to come. As they rallied around Mrs. Chen and began to forge a new path forward, the stage was set for a final chapter that would test their newfound unity and redefine the very meaning of family. 1 year had passed since the fateful trip to the hospital, a year filled with changes, challenges, and growth for the extended Hawthorne family. Mrs. Chen, having made a remarkable recovery, had become a permanent fixture in their lives, moving into a comfortable guest house on the Hawthorne estate. Her presence was a constant reminder of the twists of fate that had brought them all together. On a warm summer evening, the family gathered in the expansive backyard of the mansion for a celebration. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and laughter filled the air as friends and family mingled, sharing stories and creating new memories. At the center of it all was Alex, now a year older and wiser, his face glowing with happiness as he moved between the three father figures in his life. Victor, the grandfather who had become like a father to him, watched proudly as Alex showed Tom and Robert his latest soccer trophy. Sarah stood off to the side, taking in the scene with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. If someone had told her 2 years ago that she would be here surrounded by so much love and support, she would never have believed it. Sophia approached, handing her daughter a glass of champagne. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, following Sarah's gaze. Sarah smiled, leaning into her mother's embrace. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed. And yet," Sophia mused, "in many ways we've come full circle, back to where we always should have been, together." As the evening wore on, Victor called for everyone's attention, tapping his glass gently. The gathering quieted, all eyes turning to the family patriarch. "A year ago," Victor began, his voice strong with emotion, "our family was forever changed. We faced challenges we never could have anticipated, and we emerged stronger for it." He paused, looking around at the faces of his loved ones. "Today, we're not just celebrating Alex's birthday or Mrs. Chen's recovery. We're celebrating the power of love, the strength of family, and the beauty of second chances." He raised his glass high. "To family, in all its wonderful, messy, unconventional forms, to the love that brought us together and the love that will keep us strong." As glasses clinked and cheers erupted, Sarah felt a tug on her sleeve. She looked down to see Alex, his young face serious. "Mom," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I have something I want to say." A hush fell over the gathering as Alex stepped forward, suddenly shy under the attention of so many. But as he looked around at the faces of his family, his mother, his grandfathers, his uncles, Mrs. Chen, and his 2 fathers, he found the courage to speak. "I used to think I didn't have a family," Alex began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But now I know that family isn't just about who you're born to, it's about who loves you, who stands by you no matter what." He turned to Sarah, his eyes shining. "Mom, you've always been my hero. You never gave up on us." Then to Victor and Sophia, "Grandpa, Grandma, you showed me what it means to have a home." To James, "Uncle James, you taught me that it's okay to be myself." Alex's gaze moved to Tom and Robert standing side by side. And Dad," he said, a small smile playing on his lips at the unusual address. "You both chose to be part of my life. You showed me that it's never too late for love." Finally, he looked at Mrs. Chen, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "And Grandma Chen, You saved us. You're the reason we're all here together." As Alex finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Sarah knelt down, pulling her son into a tight embrace. "Oh, Alex," she whispered, "you're the one who brought us all together. You're our miracle." The celebration continued late into the night, the Hawthorne estate filled with joy and laughter. As the last guests departed and the family began to wind down, Sarah found herself back in the spot where it had all began, the old confectionery shop, now renovated and reopened as a family business. Standing behind the counter, surrounded by jars of colorful sweets, Sarah felt a sense of completion. The journey that had started with a desperate act, a stolen chocolate, had come full circle. That small act of kindness from a stranger had set in motion a series of events that had not only saved her and Alex, but had created a family bound by love, forgiveness, and understanding. As she locked up the shop and made her way back to the mansion, Sarah paused to look up at the star-filled sky. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but Sarah knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. For in the end, the greatest legacy of the Hawthorne family wasn't their wealth or their business empire. It was the love they shared, the bonds they had forged, and the family they had built. One choice, one act of kindness, one leap of faith at a time. As Sarah joined her family on the porch, watching the last of the fireflies dance in the summer night, she knew that this was just the beginning of their story. A story of hope, of second chances, and of the enduring power of family in all its beautiful, unexpected forms.